Hello, and welcome to this clean historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest. The Accused Rancher's Christmas Bride by Martha Gillcrest. Chapter 1. Boston, Massachusetts, 1879. A sharp breeze wriggled its way under the closed doors of Fuller's Emporium, making Chloe Fuller shiver as it licked around her ankles. She was used to the fickle weather that often blew in off the sea, but what concerned her more was whether it might drive away customers. While the Emporium was at least warmer than Boston's streets, it wasn't what the family needed to encourage more sales of their wares. No time to linger, though, she muttered to herself. Every cent counted, whatever the weather was doing. Glancing at the clock, she busied herself with restocking the various shelves. She made sure there was an ample supply of tea leaves and dried goods for baking before turning her attention to the area for ribbons, buttons, and various dyed laces. Her stepfather, Gregory Fuller, owned the store. He'd recently had the bright idea to include a tea shop on the other side of the room. It meant that Boston's finest ladies could dine on tea and cake while their maids picked up what they needed instead. Chloe hadn't been convinced by the idea at first, but the news had clearly swept through the neighborhood, and they now found themselves often hosting small parties of well-to-do women who were determined not to be left out of the latest trend. In spite of it adding to her workload, Chloe was never happier than when she was busy. The long hours in the store served as a distraction from everything else that was going on in her life. As she carefully arranged pots of hair pomade, her thoughts turned toward her ma. Mary was resting in the house, and Chloe felt helpless as her health seemed to become more troubled with each passing day. If she gave in to the dark pathway her thoughts wanted to take, she realized that what terrified her most was the fact that losing her dear ma would leave her alone in the world with nobody but her stepfamily to take mercy on her. She shuddered at the thought, tucking a stray lock of her dark brown hair back into the neat bun at the nape of her neck. Don't assume the worst. That was what her ma often told her. She sighed and forced herself to focus on the task at hand instead of worrying about the future. Bustling over to the dry goods shelf to make sure each bag of sugar was facing the correct way. Maybe it would be a good idea to do all of our displays like this, she called over to her stepsister, Emily. The girl with golden hair and a button nose barely acknowledged her, other than with an irritated sigh. It was a common response any time she had to deal with Chloe. "What do you mean?" she grumbled. Emily came over to where Chloe was, making sure everything was stacked uniformly, and folded her arms. "Well, I think it could do us some good to be a little more careful with how we present our wares," Chloe continued, shrugging her shoulders to add a touch of nonchalance. Perhaps it would encourage folks to buy more. She tried to ignore the way Emily's cold gaze gave way to a roll of her eyes, as if the idea was nonsense. "I know I would be more inclined to pick from a well-organized store than one that was anything but, and if we group complementary items together, our customers might buy several things at once." "That sounds like a grand idea," Paige, the shop assistant, said cheerfully. A puff of dust rose up from where she was sweeping the wooden floorboards with her broom in an attempt to clear some of the mess that seemed to appear from nowhere on windy days. She was only 12 years old, orphaned when she was even younger, but everyone in the Fuller family appreciated the extra set of hands. She was wise beyond her years, and Chloe knew that the girl heard everything. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but their interaction was cut short by another voice. "What are you both babbling about in the corner?" Gregory demanded, coming in from the back room where he did the bookwork. "I don't want any customers to see the state of this place and you standing idly chattering. Come on, we need to hurry." "I was just telling Emily." "I don't want to hear it. You're supposed to be serving any customers we have." Gregory cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. His frown made the wiry gray hairs of his brows stick out even more, and the wrinkles in his expression cut deep into his skin. showing his years of work to get to where he was today. "But I had an idea. I just told you I don't want to hear it," Gregory snapped. Chloe swallowed her words, knowing that she couldn't win. Her mother was bedbound and could do nothing to stand up for her, so she would just have to grin and bear it. "You should be grateful to be working here when I didn't have to hire you. There is a role for you, but it's cleaning, tidying, and serving customers, not pretending to have ideas. That's not what I pay you for." Chloe almost laughed at the mention of pay. Her only payment was the roof over her head, unlike Emily, who was showered with treats. Emily was slowly moving away from her in a bid to show that she wasn't involved in what was happening. But Chloe knew that even if she were, Gregory would never say a word against his own daughter. Despite her many flaws that she never attempted to hide, Emily could do no wrong in his eyes. She had her paw well and truly wrapped around her little finger. Chloe worked quietly for another hour, doing her best to be efficient but not draw attention to herself, as she knew it would only inflame Gregory's short temper. Her mind was still reeling with everything she wished she had the bravery to say back to her stepfather. But he was right. He'd given her a job, and she had to be grateful for that. He could have insisted she worked at one of the local garment factories. And in spite of Emily's criticisms, she took pride in her role at the store and enjoyed serving their customers. As it got close to lunchtime, there was a lull in people out shopping. Emily swished past and walked purposefully toward her pa with a spring in her step. "Papa, I've been having a few ideas about how we could improve the store," Emily said casually. Chloe paused what she was doing, being careful to stay out of his view so she could listen. "Oh, yes? Perhaps we should make sure that we're stacking the shelves in a neater fashion. Then it would be more appealing to our customers, and they may be more inclined to buy them. Also, I wondered about arranging things together to encourage folks to buy more. For example, we could put hair combs by the pomade and cigars next to men's handkerchiefs." At that moment, Chloe caught Paige's eye, both of them recognizing that those were, in fact, Chloe's ideas. "What a wonderful idea, Emily," her father exclaimed. Chloe felt her heart sink as she listened to praise that should have been directed toward her. "Honestly, what would I do without having you around? It's a good thing you always want the best for the business." He was laughing and shaking his head as though in disbelief that he hadn't come up with the idea himself. Chloe couldn't muster up a smile as he passed, instead opting to keep her head down, knowing her place all too well. "Perhaps Chloe and Paige should follow your example," he added sourly under his breath. He disappeared back into his office. "Miss Emily, you know that idea wasn't your own," Paige blurted out accusingly. Chloe couldn't believe the boldness of the young girl now that Gregory was no longer in the room. Emily appeared just as shocked by the statement, her eyes narrowing as she approached Paige. "What did you just say?" "You stole Miss Chloe's idea. I heard it with my own ears," Paige continued, stammering a little as Emily drew closer. "Paige, it really doesn't matter," Chloe cut in quickly, not wanting the young girl to waste her breath on defending her. Chloe was more than used to Emily's ways, and she understood her place, even if it wasn't always fair. "The emporium closes soon," Emily said in a low voice. "And when it does, you're going to scrub the floors." Chloe saw Paige's face fall. "But I only scrubbed them this morning." "I don't care. I've asked you to do them again, so you will." Emily knew how much Paige didn't like doing the back-breaking chore and was only telling her out of spite. It was cruel payback for speaking out, and Chloe could only hope poor Paige would learn not to defend her in such an outspoken way. "Remember your place, Paige." Emily gave her a thin smile. "You're an orphan, and we didn't have to take you in. You both should be more grateful for my father's generosity. Where would you be without it? Out on the streets? Stuck in a workhouse?" With a toss of her blonde curls, she flounced off. Chloe shuddered. She knew that she would be at a greater risk of those fates in the future. Her mother's health was declining, and while even the thought pained Chloe, she knew that there was a large chance that her mother wouldn't make it much further in life. Whenever that happened, Chloe detested the thought of being at the mercy of Gregory and Emily Fuller. "Don't worry, I'll help you sweep up as soon as we close." It will make the task easier." Chloe gave the young girl a sympathetic smile. They both knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of Emily's wrath. It was nearing the end of the working day when the handsome man walked in. Chloe didn't think anything of him for a moment until she realized he was staring at her with a friendly smile. "Good afternoon. I know you're closing soon, but it's not too late to pick up some cigars, is it?" His well-spoken voice was as warm as honey and complimented his aquiline features well. He had dazzling hazel eyes, and for a moment, Chloe forgot how to respond. She opened her mouth to say something, but Emily swept past her, nudging her out of the way with her elbow before she could utter a single word. Paige couldn't help but roll her eyes at the scene. "Don't mind her standing there with a blank look. She's just one of our staff," Emily said coquettishly. She gazed up at him and fluttered her eyelashes slightly. "I was just serving the gentleman, as it happens." Chloe knew what Emily was up to in an instant. "I'm the daughter of the business," Emily said, ignoring her. "It's no trouble to serve you. We have the finest cigars in Boston." She twirled her hair around her fingers, and her voice sounded slightly breathless as she spoke to him, captivating the attention that had momentarily been on Chloe. "Thank you. You're both very helpful." The gentleman tried to be gallant, but Chloe just sighed and turned back to dusting the shelves. It was just another thing she had gotten used to as she and Emily had grown older. Her stepsister was always determined to be the center of attention, no matter how bad it made Chloe look, and there was simply no point in complaining. Emily would never change. Chapter 2. Boston, Massachusetts. "How was your day? Did you meet some nice customers?" Mary's face was pale, but her eyes lit up as soon as she saw her daughter later that evening. "It was good," Chloe answered her mother as she sat at her bedside. "I served all my regulars, and we had plenty of new customers as well. Kind-hearted gentlemen who might want to start courting you?" Mary looked hopeful. Chloe looked down at her hands, avoiding her ma's gaze. "Emily likes to serve the new customers," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter," she added. "She's better at it than I am." She could tell that her mother wasn't convinced by her words, but Chloe was used to lying about her day-to-day life outside the bedroom, where Mary now spent all her time. Their brownstone house behind the emporium was where her mother rested. Chloe was simply thankful that it was close by, so that she could devote her spare time to caring for her. There was no denying that Mary was becoming increasingly frail. Every breath sounded labored, and the weight was dropping off her under her ribboned nightgown. Chloe blinked back her tears at the thought of her health declining any further. It had been hard enough losing her pa when she was just a child. Chloe imagined how delighted Emily would be at the prospect of her no longer being a part of the Fuller family. Her ma was her only tie, and she was terrified that even that would soon be gone. What would become of her then? Mary reached out and took one of her hands in both of her much frailer ones. Chloe stared down at her fingers, noticing how thin they had become. The blue veins looked like meandering streams under her translucent skin, and her grip was weak. A succession of fevers had taken such a toll on her ma that to Chloe it didn't even look as though she had the strength to get up. "Chloe, I know that this isn't what you want to hear, but I know I'm not much longer on this earth," Mary said, her voice cracking. Chloe quickly shook her head as though the action would be enough to stop the words from being true. "I just want you to be happy and secure in your future, Chloe. I want you to marry a kind-hearted man who will care for you." Chloe couldn't help but smile sadly. "But Ma, I don't have any time for courting. There is always something to be done in the store. Not to mention all the other chores I have to do." She shrugged. "Besides, Gregory and Emily wouldn't want me to walk out with a gentleman. I think they would consider it a distraction." Her mother closed her eyes for a moment, and Chloe's heart constricted with the grief she knew would be upon her all too soon. "You could look in the newspaper," Mary suggested, struggling to sit up a little higher on her pillows. "Could you take a few coins and buy the Matrimonial Times? There are always nice gentlemen out west looking for wives." Chloe blinked with surprise, wondering for a moment whether she had heard her ma correctly. She glanced at the nightstand, but there was no sign that her mother had taken the laudanum that helped ease her pain, which sometimes made her lose track of her thoughts. I can't go out west, Chloe said, squeezing Mary's hand. She shook her head. How could I possibly leave you, Ma? You can't mean it, surely? The thought of leaving behind Gregory and Emily sounded tempting, but nothing would drag her from her dear Ma. She wondered whether another fever was brewing, which was giving Mary strange ideas. I don't mean now, my dear. Mary's words were so quiet that Chloe had to lean forward to catch them. But when I'm gone, what will be left for you here? Don't talk like that, please, Ma. You're going to get better, and then you can help me find a suitable man. Chloe's words sounded hollow, and in her heart of hearts, she knew that her Ma was right. Gregory and Emily had no interest in her future. She was merely a convenient source of labor for them, which marriage would spoil. Chloe could only begin to imagine the upset it would cause if they found out Chloe was trying to find a man for herself. Mary shook her head, taking a deep breath so she could speak more clearly. I'm begging you, Chloe, find a nice gentleman. I promise that you have my blessing for it, she added, giving her a reassuring smile. I know what Emily is like. The best way is for you to travel west and make a new start when I'm no longer here. The following morning, Chloe resumed her role of stacking shelves as Emily stood idly by the counter, talking to any gentleman who came in. Gregory arrived late in the morning as usual, and Chloe earned no more than a brief glance. She knew he had a similar sentiment to Emily in that he didn't want her to succeed. Although he had probably loved Mary when he took pity on her as a widow, taking Chloe on had always felt like a begrudging act of charity, even more so since Mary's health started to decline. Chloe always tried her best to stay out of their way, but Gregory's hints about her status being more of an employee than a family member were becoming harder to ignore. He thinks of me in the same vein as Paige. The thought was shocking, but Chloe had to face reality. It was true. Neither Gregory nor Emily wanted her to do well, whether it was related to her job in the shop or in terms of finding a suitable husband. Mr. Fuller always seems to look cross with us, Paige whispered as she struggled past with a large box to unpack. Chloe nodded, and they shared a smile of understanding. It must have come to something if even 12-year-old Paige had noticed. I think it's me more than you, she whispered back with a rueful smile. Emily is annoyed that the man buying cigars was friendly to me. She rolled her eyes. Chloe dreaded the thought of living in Emily's shadow for the rest of her life. Emily was so jealous and selfish that Chloe was starting to envisage that she would never find a man to marry because Emily would always be there to get in the way. It was a bleak outlook on her future, and it suddenly dawned on Chloe that it was easily plausible she could end up as a spinster. She shuddered at the thought, but it was clear to her now that her future was in jeopardy. Her mother's health was declining, which meant she was slowly losing the one person in the world who would look out for her. Chloe was going to have to do something about it on her own, and she turned her ma's words from the night before over in her mind. We're short of bread for the tea room. Emily's words interrupted her thoughts, and she stood there with an expectant look on her face. Well, don't just stand there. Go to the bakery and buy some more for us. You know I don't like going out when it's windy. Chloe nodded and hastily took her apron off before tying her thick woolen shawl over her shoulders and putting her bonnet on. Emily's dislike of the breezy weather would give her some welcome respite away from the store for a few minutes. Mind you, ask for a fair price. Emily watched as Chloe took a few coins from behind the counter. The spring sunshine felt refreshing on Chloe's face, and her cheeks were soon rosy as she hurried through the streets toward their favorite bakery. What Emily didn't know was that Mary had given her a few coins from the tin she kept hidden under her bed to buy a copy of the Matrimonial Times. Chloe had accepted them just to keep her ma happy, with no intention of actually looking for marriage that way. But her gloomy thoughts about her future forced her to reconsider. She wasn't sure what drove her to purchase the newspaper in the end, whether it was her own sudden panic about a lifetime of working for Gregory as a spinster or because it was her ma's wish. Either way, Chloe paid for the newspaper out of Mary's few coins so that at least she could tell her mother that she was looking. On her way back to the emporium, curiosity got the better of Chloe, and she started to skim through some of the advertisements in the paper. She pulled a slight face, glancing over her shoulder as if it was somehow shameful, but then recalled the way that Emily had barged past her when the handsome customer had shown a hint of interest in her. "It might not be ideal, but maybe Ma knows best," she muttered to herself. She had always daydreamed about going to a dance to meet a sweetheart, or perhaps meeting a like-minded gentleman at church, but on the odd occasion such a thing seemed likely, Emily would swoop in and monopolize the conversation. Chloe felt as though she was running out of time to make a decision for herself, and reluctantly started to consider whether a new life somewhere far away from Boston and Emily was going to be her only option. Later that afternoon, Chloe peeked out into the hallway to make sure she was alone, and then retreated to the parlor to read the advertisements properly. Single rancher, a man who owns a saloon, a traveling salesman, gentleman seeking a woman to help look after his children. Her lips moved as she ran her finger down the page, reading each advertisement under her breath. Her eye kept being drawn back to the ones featuring ranchers, and she sat back in the wingback chair, letting herself imagine what it might be like. She closed her eyes, picturing vast, grassy plains with cattle grazing, dotted with sturdy log cabins. A smile curved on her mouth as the image of a rugged man in a broad-rimmed hat riding toward her on horseback floated into her mind. "Is this really the sort of life I could have?" she whispered to herself. It seemed too good to be true. Surely someone with her plain looks, as Emily always liked to point out, could never marry a rancher. She sighed. It was a nice dream, but too far from her reality to hope it might come true. "Why should Emily marry well, and you stay beholden to the emporium, Chloe? You deserve to be happy, and I can't rest until I know you're at least making plans for your future." Mary's parting words drifted back into her mind, plus the fact that Mary had put her fingers to her lips, telling her that it would be their secret. "Chloe, why aren't you cooking dinner?" Emily's strident tones from the hallway snapped Chloe from her enjoyable dreams, and she jumped guiltily out of her chair. I'm coming now," Chloe called. She stuffed the Matrimonial Times hastily behind a cushion and hurried out. "What's gotten into you?" Emily asked suspiciously. "3 times this afternoon you've ignored me. Why are you looking so pleased with yourself?" Chloe lowered her gaze, remembering too late how sharp-eyed Emily could be. "It's nothing. I was thinking about something Ma said to me, that's all." She bustled toward the kitchen, hoping that would appease Emily's curiosity. Emily watched her retreating back through narrowed eyes. She could tell that Chloe was up to something, and she didn't like it one little bit. "Are you keeping secrets?" Emily murmured. "That won't do." She waited until Chloe had turned into the kitchen and let herself into the parlor, determined to discover why her stepsister had been looking so cheerful all afternoon. Glancing around the room, at first, everything looked just as it normally did. But then she noticed that the cushion was out of place. Darting to the chair, she snatched up the newspaper. "The Matrimonial Times, huh? Are you planning to get wed before me?" 2 spots of color appeared on Emily's cheeks as she angrily flicked through the newspaper, seeing page after page of gentlemen out west seeking suitable wives. Her first reaction was a sneering laugh. "As if anyone would want you, Chloe dear," she said to the silent room. But then she read several of the advertisements more closely. They seemed to imply that as long as the women were hardworking and adaptable, that would be more than enough to settle into married bliss in the frontier lands. Emily scowled as she considered what life would be like without Chloe. Emily would never admit it to her stepsister, but she was useful to have around. As tempting as it seemed to have nobody vying for any suitor's attention, it would be most inconvenient for her if Chloe left to head west chasing after a man. If Mary was still lingering in ill health, caring for her would fall to Emily. And all the chores Chloe did in the store, the jobs that Emily hated, would also fall to her until a replacement could be found. The thought of it caused her temper to rise. Emily wasn't cut out to care for her stepmother, and she certainly had no intention of working any harder in the emporium than was necessary. "You're not going anywhere, Chloe," she muttered harshly. She scrunched the newspaper into a ball and threw it on the fire, watching the flames devour it with a satisfied smile. Now that Emily knew that Chloe was trying to escape, she would do everything in her power to stop her. Chapter 3. Wyoming, 1879. Henry Stewart was stiff as he awoke with the sun. The morning had a chill to it that caught him slightly off guard and made it even harder for him to get up and on with his morning. The shack, which currently served as his home, creaked and groaned as though it were a living creature, but he knew it was just the wind. It was able to slip through every small crack and crevice, and despite his best attempts to block the holes, he was certain that there were plenty of them left to let the cold air in. It was still summer, but this first nip in the air was a clear sign that fall, and then winter, was on its way. After rolling up his bed, Henry decided to delay his start. The mountains and rushing rivers would still be there if he waited half an hour. He lit a small fire to boil some water. A steaming mug of coffee was an indulgence he didn't like to go without, and he felt his spirits lift as the shack filled with the comforting aroma. His stomach rumbled, and he eyed his meager food supplies. "Time to go into town soon," he muttered. He chewed on the last bread roll he had. It was stale, but not moldy, which was something. He would need to hunt for rabbits to make a stew with his last few vegetables if he was to fill his belly until he could get into town. The woods where his shack was situated were full of them, but Henry hadn't laid any fresh traps for a few days. It was a quiet life, just him and the wildlife in the surrounding woods, but he liked it that way. As he sipped his scalding coffee sitting in the chair he had on the small porch overlooking the mountains, his thoughts drifted back over what had led him to this point. If asked, Henry would call himself a gold prospector, although it wasn't what he'd always done. The lure of reading about men who came out looking for gold was first just idle curiosity, but then it became like an itch that had to be scratched. What had fascinated him most was the idea that a man could simply go out and search for something that would change his fortune. Although the harsh reality of it had long since taken the luster off the idea, and he knew in his heart the novelty had long since worn off. A robin hopped close to his feet and looked at him with button-bright eyes. "There you go," he said quietly, brushing a few breadcrumbs off his lap for the bird. "Maybe today will be my lucky day, huh?" He grinned to himself, recognizing the fact that he said that every day. That's what gold did to a man, or at least the promise of it. The gold rush wasn't something he'd ever thought he would jump into, but he had seen with his own eyes how someone's fortune could change in an instant. He sighed as his previous good spirits started to feel deflated. Henry tried not to think about it too much, but it was worrying him that he was yet to have any luck. Sure, he'd found a few flakes in the river, the smallest kind that weren't really worth selling. They fetched so little money. But finding anything, no matter how small, means I'm onto something, doesn't it? He asked the robin. Or am I just chasing a dream? By his reasoning, even though the flakes had no weight, they were a sign that gold was there. He just had to persevere. Henry wasn't a greedy man. He knew that much about himself. His goal was to find just enough gold to buy a ranch of his own, like the one he'd grown up on with his brother and parents. A shadow crossed his face as he thought back to his childhood home. Happy times before it went wrong, he muttered. His pa had always told him and his brother the place would be theirs one day. That's what all this hard work is for, boys, he'd said. Henry could still recall his pa's gravelly voice and the glint of pride in his eyes at the thought of building a business for his sons to inherit. It didn't work out that way, though, Henry said to himself. He stood up and stretched. The next memories weren't so good. When his parents died, the bank manager declared that there was so much debt on the place that they would have to reclaim the ranch to pay them off. Henry and his brother John had been cast out into the world with no choice but to leave the family homestead and everything they'd ever known behind. Henry was no stranger to hard work, though. He had been determined to reverse his failed fortunes, first with work in a lumber yard, then several years hunting and trapping. Finally, the lure of prospecting had bitten him, and he'd come to Wyoming a few months ago. He was determined to find a nugget of gold to buy a ranch for himself. Nothing grand, he said to the robin, who was still waiting for more crumbs. "A small block of land will do me and John just fine." He bit his lip. It came so naturally to talk about him and John, but it wasn't to be. After losing the family ranch, where Henry had buried himself in work, John had taken a different path. The bottom of a whiskey bottle had become John's escape. The oblivion he turned to more and more. Henry shook his head. It had been 5 years since he had seen John, which was hard to believe. He put his hat on and tried to shake his mind free from the dark thoughts which threatened to engulf him. John had made his choices. He couldn't help him anymore, not when he didn't even know where he was. "Time to get to work," he muttered. He took a deep lungful of fresh air just as the sun's rays filtered through the trees. It was going to be a beautiful day. He might not have much to his name, but that didn't matter when he still had hope. He slung his tools into the hessian sack he used for them and threw it over his shoulder, finally ready to begin a new day of searching for gold. The air was crisp, but he quickly warmed up while hiking through the landscape. Even in the early light of the morning, Henry could appreciate how beautiful the scenery was around him. He climbed a small hill and paused to catch his breath and enjoy the view. The spot he prospected in was well away from the majority of the local mining camps. It was a deliberate choice. Henry found the lifestyle of the miners' camps too rowdy for his liking. They were the kind of places where there was more drinking and fighting than work being done, and he was there to find gold, not to drink with strangers. Up on what he had started to regard as his hill, it was much quieter. Another reason he distanced himself was that he had grown weary of hearing drunken tales of the gold other men had found. His ma had raised him to be glad when other folks had success, but when it happened day after day, as his own luck seemed to stay stubbornly elusive, he figured it was easier to strike out on his own instead. He turned his face to the sun, enjoying its warmth. The rugged landscape of Wyoming was part of what had drawn him here. Aside from the lure of gold, he was happy in his own company, or he had been until recently. "Nothing good will come from dwelling on being lonesome," he said, chastising himself. He plodded on up the hill, but couldn't shake the feeling that he had been getting more often lately. He wanted a good woman by his side. But everything led back to the gold. Barely scraping by in a leaky shack was no life for a woman. He needed to find gold first if he was to have any chance at all of courting and marrying. "The gold, that's what it always comes down to," he said with a bemused chuckle. "If I can find just enough, everything will change. I'll have a ranch and I can find a kind-hearted woman to share it with." Buoyed up by his dream, he walked faster. Sure enough, a few measly flakes weren't going to cover it, but every new day brought new opportunities, he told himself. After picking a spot in the shade, Henry set his hessian sack down and got into a comfortable position. Far down below, he could hear the sounds of the other men talking and distracting one another. He wouldn't make the same mistake. He let his thoughts wander as he took up the pick and started to chip away at the rock face, wishing there was a way he could see into it to know where his perfect strike might lie, to yield the gold he so craved. The canyon around him was vast. The jagged rocks sloped and jutted out randomly, punctuated only by a stream of water close to where he had set up his tools for the day. Despite the morning chill, Henry could tell that the land was going to warm quickly as the sun grew higher in the cloud-speckled sky. After several hours of chipping away at the rock with his pick, Henry realized his concentration was waning. He decided to take a different approach and approach the cool stream with his pan, scooping, swirling, and tilting it with practiced ease. The water was cold against his fingers as he let the pan break through its surface, which gave him a new lease of energy. Usually, he found the process therapeutic, but for some reason, he couldn't settle into it. With every fresh scoop of water, he felt more foolish, realizing it contained nothing more than stones and grit. The morning wore on, and still he had no luck. His eyes were starting to play tricks on him as he caught glimpses of what he thought was gold, but turned out to be just the sunlight glinting off pebbles. He wasn't sure how much more his patience could take. A sudden shout of excitement from down the valley made him frown with frustration. "Another man's fortune made," he muttered. "Lord, I know I have no place to ask, but please grant me patience. I don't mind hard work. All I want is to have the chance to honor my pa's wish to carry on ranching. A small herd of cattle, a patch of land to call my own and improve. Give me the courage to keep on, Lord. And thank you for the blessing of this beautiful land to work in. Henry knew his prayer lacked elegance, but it came from the heart. The breeze whispered through the trees, and he felt a sense of peace wash through him. God had a plan, and he just had to trust in it. He decided to grab his pick one last time and chip away more of the rock for an hour before heading off to catch some rabbits, letting the sound of birdsong drift over him. He was so enjoying being surrounded by nature that he barely noticed the sound of his pick on the rock had changed slightly. The usual sharp strike had turned to a deeper noise, as though the nature of the rock was different. Henry paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he thought about hearing that sound in his dreams. It took him a minute to realize that it was actually happening. Carefully with his pick, he managed to chip away more of the rock around it. His hands were shaking, and his excitement started to build. "Is this it? At last?" he whispered. A cloud moved from where it had momentarily covered the sun to reveal a small area of the rock face that had a telltale dull gleam of gold. It wasn't large, but it was more than Henry had ever seen before, and a laugh of disbelief escaped his lips. He moved to one side so as not to cast his own shadow over it, and it glinted, shining like a beacon of hope to him. "Thank you, Lord," he gasped. His voice was thick with emotion, relief, happiness, but above all, gratitude. He couldn't be sure if it would be enough for him to start a new life, but it was something. "I wish you could have seen this, Pa and Ma." He felt tears pricking the back of his eyes and took a shaky breath. Perhaps he was going to be able to have a small ranch after all. Perhaps his luck had changed, and he was going to get a fresh start in life. Several weeks later, Henry took a deep breath, straightened his collar, and pushed the door open to Mr. Clark's office. His hands shook slightly as he placed the bag of coins down on the desk between them. He could still scarcely believe how his luck had turned, and half expected to find himself waking up in the old shack to discover it had all been a dream. "Good morning, Mr. Stewart." Connor Clark's gruff words were just the reassurance that Henry needed. It was really happening. "Good morning," Henry replied, glancing around the office. It was lined with heavy, leather-bound books, and several certificates were framed on the wall behind him. Mr. Connor Clark, a respectable lawyer in the town of Rocky River, regarded him coolly from across the desk. His eyes were slightly narrowed, clearly still skeptical that Henry would be able to fund his ambitions. "It's all there," Henry announced. He nudged the money toward Mr. Clark, the result of all those long days existing on rabbit stew and dry bread, working from daybreak until dark. He was cashing in on the gold he'd discovered to finally buy his own property. "All right, Mr. Stewart, I'm just going to need you to sign some documents. They're just the deeds and declarations to make it all official." Henry nodded, momentarily lost for words. After being paid for his lucky find, he had headed straight to Rocky River to search for a place to call home. He had heard good things about the town and how it was growing, and decided it was as good a place as any to settle down and fulfill his dream of owning some land to have his own ranch. The lawyer, an older man with a graying beard, signed the papers first, his signature smooth and crisp. He then passed the documents across the mahogany desk. The contract was riddled with terms that Henry couldn't quite grasp. His brown eyes scanned over the page, trying to make sense of it all, but in the end, he conceded that it would be fine, and he signed it with a flourish. "There we are," Mr. Clark said decisively. "I can declare that Green Oak Ranch is now yours. Congratulations." "Thank you." Henry wiped his brow with his shirt cuff and gave a short laugh of disbelief. He stared down at the document once more, his eyes transfixed by seeing his own name on the deed of ownership. It was all official, and there was no going back. "Mr. Stewart of Green Oak Ranch, huh? It has a nice ring to it." "I suppose I should also formally welcome you to Rocky River," the lawyer said, breaking into a warm smile. He stood up and extended his hand, giving him a firm handshake. "That is kind of you," Henry said while nodding. "It's going to be a bit of a change from what I'm used to, but several folks have told me it's a nice town to live near." It may not be much at the moment, but this is an up-and-coming town for sure. It's folks like you that I hope are going to make Rocky River prosper. We have plenty of miners, ranchers, you name it, all eager to settle in the area, and many new businesses opening to serve them. There are lots of good opportunities here. You've chosen well." Mr. Clark gave him a curious look. "Say, if you don't mind me asking, how did you make the money to buy the ranch in the first place?" Henry shrugged his shoulders. "I was mining out yonder and struck some gold. Like so many others, I came out west to go prospecting, hoping to change my fortunes." He pulled a rueful face. "I'll be honest, I was losing faith before I found the gold that brought me to you. Almost gave it all up." "Well, congratulations. Sounds like you're one lucky man." "Ranching is also in my blood," Henry continued. For some reason, it felt important not to look like an amateur in front of the lawyer. "I grew up on a ranch back east. My folks worked hard, and I was taught how to thrive in that kind of environment. I'm looking forward to putting my skills to the test and making this ranch successful, and having a home to call my own again." "Well, it sounds like you've gotten things handled pretty nicely," Mr. Clark said. "I must say, Mr. Stewart, I hope your wife won't mind the homestead being pretty rough. It's not the coziest of dwellings in its current state." "Oh, that's not a problem," Henry said hastily. Mr. Connor nodded. "She must be very understanding. I've just gotten married myself recently, and I must say it's nice to come home to a woman in the evening after a hard day's work." Henry couldn't let the misunderstanding continue. "I'm not yet married, Mr. Clark. I figured it would be better to get a ranch first, and then look for the right woman for me." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I know that the town is still relatively young. Are there many eligible women around?" "You wouldn't be the first gentleman to wonder," Mr. Clark said, happy to share his experience with the newcomer. "The truth is, like most frontier towns, eligible women are scarce, as most are already married when they arrive here." Henry looked crestfallen. He had been dreaming about having a kind-hearted wife to share his ranch with for so long that it felt like a blow to hear Mr. Clark's words. "If I could give you some advice, I recommend you place an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times." Mr. Clark's expression softened. "It's how I found my dear wife, and that's what many of the other ranchers and miners in these parts end up doing too." "The Matrimonial Times?" Henry echoed. It wasn't what he'd imagined doing. "That's the one. You'll want to do it soon, Mr. Stewart. Once winter closes in, it can be harsh out here on your lonesome. You won't regret having a wife to keep you warm in the cold months ahead, I can assure you." Henry nodded his head slowly. "Well, thank you for the advice, Mr. Clark." He tucked the deed document into his inner coat pocket and picked up his hat. "Where might I need to go to be able to place such an advertisement?" he asked, feeling slightly embarrassed. Mr. Clark smiled cheerfully. "There's no shame in it, Mr. Stewart. I can't recommend it highly enough. Just head for Mrs. Devereaux's matrimonial bureau in the center of town and tell her I sent you." "Thank you again, Mr. Clark," Henry said. He walked away with a thoughtful expression as he pondered the lawyer's advice. Henry had heard of mail-order brides traveling west to marry, and had even seen many of the gold prospectors making use of these types of matchmaking services. But he hadn't figured he would need to do the same. "I guess there's no harm in it," he muttered to himself. His mind was already buzzing with ideas for the ranch, and he realized there would be very little time spare for him to travel into Rocky River regularly to court a woman in the traditional fashion. Being able to get to know a potential bride by correspondence was starting to feel like a good idea the more he thought about it. He strode down the street, and his spirits lifted as he saw the swirling writing on the sign for the matrimonial bureau. He had his ranch, but if he was going to make it a proper home like the one he grew up in, filled with happiness and a family of his own, he would need a good woman by his side to help him, someone he could love and look forward to the future with. Chapter 4. Boston, Massachusetts. Chloe shivered and tightened her shawl. The biting winter chill was on its way, and there would be no stopping its strong winds as it swept in from the coast. There was a stove in the corner of the store, but she still had to rub her hands together to keep her fingers nimble as she stacked the shelves ahead of a new day. Paige was working nearby, sweeping and polishing, while Emily had given herself the pleasant task of decorating the shop windows to draw in customers. She had graciously allowed Chloe to add a few festive touches of her own. A wooden angel carved by a local carpenter stood proudly on the counter to match the smaller ones, which hung from boughs of holly and ivy along with angels and tinsel. They had also arranged candles inside the windows, and the twinkling flames made the store look cozy and welcoming now that they were heading into winter. It had been Chloe's idea to make the shop look festive even though it was still only fall, and being the first in the neighborhood to do so had drawn in hordes of new customers to buy gifts ahead of time. Not that Gregory gave her any credit for it. "How's your ma?" Paige asked quietly as she went past. "You look like you haven't been sleeping well." "Much the same," Chloe replied. It was kind of the young girl to ask, but she didn't really want to talk about it. She sighed as she remembered the doctor's grave words a few days earlier. He diagnosed influenza, telling them it was rife in Boston that winter. Chloe was beginning to fear the worst, despite Mary's assurances that it would soon pass. "Think about the good things, my dear," she had croaked the evening before, after Chloe had been reading to her. As she busied herself with tidying the ribbon display, Chloe decided to take her ma's advice and allowed her thoughts to wander over the one bright spot in her life: her growing friendship with a gentleman called Henry Stewart from a place out west named Rocky River. After discovering that Emily had burnt her copy of the Matrimonial Times, Chloe had realized she needed to guard her privacy more. She purchased a second copy, but kept it hidden, and that's when she saw his advertisement. After much hesitation and praying for guidance, she finally decided to write to him out of interest, telling herself there was nothing to lose in replying to his advertisement, as it would probably end there. But fate had other ideas, and Henry wrote back. Before long, they were corresponding as often as possible. For once, she was grateful that Emily considered waiting for the mail beneath her, which meant that Chloe could intercept Henry's letters without anyone knowing. She hummed under her breath as she worked, thinking about the letters. With each one that arrived, Chloe found herself feeling more enamored with Henry. The life he described was like nothing she could imagine, working with livestock in the sweeping lands of the frontier. But there was something gentle and courteous about his manner which struck a chord with her, and her heart lifted as she eagerly awaited each new letter. Am I reading too much into things? How can I really know what someone is like from letters alone? These were the thoughts that slid into her mind most days, but she tried to look on the bright side. While it was difficult to tell everything about him in the form of a letter, it was clear to her that he was a good and kind man. There was just something about the tone of his writing that told her he would take care of her. He sounded humble, but had recently come into some money thanks to the gold rush, and he was now looking for a wife. The only issue which gave her cause for concern was that she had never met him. Her discreet inquiries about mail-order brides showed that it was quite normal not to meet your sweetheart until you were about to marry, but it made her frown with worry nonetheless. What if he isn't the man who writes to me so fondly in his letters? What if it's all an act? So far, there was nothing in the letters that led her to believe he might deceive her, and there had been no mention of marriage yet. But still, her emotions were torn. His evident interest in her felt like one of the few positive things that brightened her day, but she still could barely imagine uprooting her life and crossing the country to meet her husband for the first time. "Why are you dawdling with your work?" Emily snapped as she swept past to unlock the door to their first customers of the day. "Papa has asked me to keep an eye on you. He thinks you're taking advantage of his good nature and not working as hard as you should be." "That's not true," Chloe countered. "I've been starting earlier than ever, and you know it." Emily sniffed and turned her nose up in disbelief. "Just because your mother is ill, it's no excuse to be idle." Her tone was cold and uncaring, and Chloe knew there was no point trying to argue her case. Emily was not a naturally kind person, and she just had to accept the jibes and spiteful comments. "I'll work through my lunch break to catch up if Gregory thinks I need to," she offered. "I'll ask him, but I expect he'll agree that it's a good idea. Surely you should be letting Chloe spend more time with her ma, Paige interjected. Poor Mrs. Fuller might not have long to live. I don't remember saying you could speak, Emily snapped. It's all a fuss about nothing, if you ask me. Chloe blinked back her tears and did her best to stay out of Emily's way for the rest of the day. She knew now that Emily resented practically everything about Chloe and her ma. She barely bothered to conceal her dislike anymore, and Emily was never going to offer her kindness, even if it cost her nothing. As soon as she had blown out the last candle in the windows that night and double-checked the bolts were across the door, Chloe headed for her mother's bedside. I'm sorry I didn't come earlier, Ma. Emily wanted me to work through lunchtime. Ah, my child, it's always a blessing to see you, her ma croaked almost as soon as Chloe entered the bedroom. The house was a lot warmer than the shop, thanks to Chloe's insistence that Mary shouldn't be cold during the long winter months. She added a few more lumps of coal to the fire and riddled it with the poker, watching the sparks fly up the chimney for a moment. Her ma was calm and accepting of her fate, which Chloe tried to emulate. Are you feeling any better with that tonic that the doctor gave you? Chloe knew as soon as she asked that there was no change. If anything, her ma looked worse than ever. Mary's face had once lit up with curiosity each time she came in, but it was now pallid and drawn from the strain of fighting against the sickness that had her in its grip. Mary feebly waved her concerns away. How are things in the shop? She asked instead. Emily has started decorating to sell more Christmas gifts, Chloe said, trying but failing to hide the sadness in her voice. It was something they used to all do together, and the fact that her ma hadn't been there to see it only served to show how ill she was. She wouldn't let me do any of the good parts, like decorating the window. Try not to take it to heart, Mary said, patting her hand. Perhaps next year you will have your own home to enjoy the festive season in, without worrying about Emily. Chloe felt a pang of pain in her heart as she realized that she would have to face the festive seasons in the future without her mother. I'm not sure I'll have my own home, she muttered. But what about the nice gentleman you've been writing to out west? Mr. Stewart, I thought things were going well? They are, though there hasn't been any mention of marriage yet, Chloe admitted. She felt she could voice anything to her mother, unafraid of her judgment as she sought answers. We have been writing to one another for several months. I hoped marriage might have been hinted at by now. Perhaps I'm just being rash in my thinking. She shrugged, trying to remain nonchalant. I guess being a mail-order bride works differently. From what you've told me, he seems like a lovely gentleman. It sounds as though he'll do the honorable thing when the time is right, my dear. Don't give up on him too soon. Chloe helped her ma as she struggled to sit up a little higher in her bed. Even that small effort exhausted her, and Mary's eyes closed for a moment as a wave of pain coursed through her. He has been very kind to me in his letters, Chloe said while nodding. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't developing feelings for him. I'm just worried he might have second thoughts about marrying someone he's never met. Her ma reached out and took Chloe's hands into hers. Chloe noticed how cold her fingers felt, despite the warmth of the room and the extra quilts she had laid on the bed. Mary stared earnestly at her daughter. Please, Chloe, I've been praying for you, and I really think you should accept his proposal when he asks. What if he doesn't ask? I have a feeling that Henry Stewart is just the sort of gentleman I would approve of, Chloe, and will ask you sooner than you think. Now come on, why don't we pray together? Always remember that the Lord's path might not be obvious at the time, but he has a plan for us. The room felt cozy with the fire crackling in the hearth, and Chloe took comfort in her mother's words. Dear Lord, forgive our sins and grant us the wisdom to accept what the future holds. Give us the strength to always look for hope in our lives. In your mercy, please let us always remember each other with love. I pray that my dear daughter Chloe will find a kind-hearted man to have a family with, that they may live and serve others in the ways you wish for them. Amen. Mary Fuller passed away later that evening in her sickbed. Chloe had gone up to the room at the top of the house to say goodnight, but as she pushed the door open, it took her only a moment to understand that her ma had gone. She had been expecting perhaps a few days of sympathy or comfort from her stepfather and stepsister. But the next morning arrived, and Chloe realized that she had been far too hopeful in wishing for such a thing. Gregory was his usual self, if not a little sharper than normal. Although she believed he loved Mary once upon a time, she couldn't help but wonder whether he had stopped loving Mary long before her illness took hold. He barely looked at her as she resumed her work in the store, doing her best to concentrate through a haze of tears. The only person who offered her a few kind words was Paige, which helped comfort her. Yet Paige isn't even family, Chloe thought to herself. With Ma gone, I'm all alone and at the mercy of Gregory and Emily. Chapter 5. Boston, Massachusetts. A week passed between her mother's death and the funeral. The day of the funeral was a bleak winter's day, and not many people from the neighborhood attended. Chloe felt as though her ties with Boston were being cut, like a ship being cast out to sea. If she had hoped that grief might unite them, nothing could be further from the truth. Emily flounced around the store, finding fault with everything, and Gregory retreated to his office, leaving her alone with her emotions. "She would have wanted you to stay positive," Paige whispered one day. She nodded toward the angels and tinsel in the window. "Your ma loved Christmas. Perhaps she's still with us in spirit?" Chloe found the girl's words oddly comforting and decided that Paige was right. She couldn't dwell on the past. As the next few days passed, she liked to imagine that her mother was now simply standing at her side and giving her strength and encouragement to go on. "I'd like hot stew for lunch," Emily announced, giving Chloe a pointed look. "I can't seem to get warm today. You'd better be off and make it. I can take care of the customers." Chloe hurried out of the store, glad to have a few minutes away from Emily's critical gaze. "A letter for you, ma'am." The mailboy gave her a cheerful grin when he saw her outside the house, glad to save the few extra steps on his weary legs. Chloe's heart lifted as she saw Henry's familiar writing, and she tore it open as soon as she was in the privacy of the kitchen. "My dearest Chloe, I pondered whether I should wait until spring, but these long winter nights have made me realize how much nicer they would be in your company. I write this in haste, so I can mail it today while I'm in town collecting supplies. After all these months of getting to know you through our letters, I feel confident that we are well suited. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Chloe gasped as she read the words she had been hoping for, and broke into a wide smile. The rest of the letter explained that if she mailed back her acceptance, Henry would meet her in Rocky River on the appointed day, and he had enclosed enough money to cover her railroad fare and travel expenses. "The proposal came, Ma," she whispered to herself, clutching the letter to her chest. She felt a pang of regret that Mary would never know about it, and was suddenly beset by doubts again. "Can I really marry a man I've never set eyes on?" She wished with all her heart that her ma could have advised her on what to do now that it was becoming a reality. Snatched remnants of conversations she had overheard on the streets of Boston came back to her about mail-order brides who had been deceived, or worse, who had returned east, finding the whole experience had been a sham. "What if it doesn't work out?" she muttered. She tucked the letter safely out of sight in her apron pocket and decided not to rush her reply. She would first think about it for a few days rather than do anything rash. Even though it had been Mary's dying wish for her to accept a proposal, and her treatment from Gregory and Emily was only likely to worsen, she couldn't quite bring herself to leave everything behind so soon after her ma's funeral. The next day, Chloe hugged the secret to herself and worked as normal. Her tumultuous emotions made it hard to concentrate, and she felt the weight of Emily's beady gaze on her more often than usual. "Miss Emily seems to be in a bad mood today," Paige said, pulling a face. She yawned and glanced at the clock behind the counter. It was almost time to lock the door, and the last customer had already left. "Maybe it's because the bad weather is keeping folks at home instead of coming here to spend their money," Chloe replied. Gregory darted them a warning look as he tipped the day's takings onto the counter to start counting them. His bony fingers deftly arranged the coins into piles, and his lips moved as he totted it all up. Chloe felt a ripple of alarm as he stomped over to the door and shot the bolts across before returning to his office for the ledger. Usually, he flew through this part of the day, but this time he was painstakingly recounting the money. Not once, but twice. Paige shot her a nervous glance and pushed the broom with renewed vigor as she saw Gregory's expression darken. "This money doesn't tally with our sales," he barked. "I've counted it 3 times, and there's a considerable amount missing." "Would you like me to check it again for you?" Chloe said. "You? Don't be ridiculous." Gregory scowled and thumped his fist on the counter, making everyone jump. "Why is there so much money missing?" he cried. The 3 of them were at a loss for words, and even Emily looked slightly nervous. Chloe didn't know anything about missing money, and she wasn't sure why Gregory was glaring at them as though it was their fault. Emily bustled toward the counter and gave her pa a sweet smile. "I saw Paige acting rather suspiciously earlier. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now this has happened. I feel I have to mention it, Papa." Chloe felt her stomach churn as she turned to look at Paige. The poor girl looked utterly terrified, and her eyes filled with tears in an instant. "No, I didn't do anything," Paige stammered. "I promise. I just did all my chores as normal, and that was it." "After everything we've done for you," Gregory roared. He thumped the counter again. "We took you from the orphanage and gave you a chance to make something of yourself, and this is how you repay my kindness? No, Mr. Fuller, I promise I haven't stolen anything from you." The tears were rolling down Paige's cheeks, and she sniffed forlornly. "I like it here, working with Chloe and Emily." Gregory strode out from behind the counter and clamped his hand on Paige's shoulder. Behind him, Chloe saw a flash of something in Emily's eyes that looked like triumph and relief. Instantly, she suspected that it was Emily who had taken the money. Her stepsister was smart and conniving and knew the finger of suspicion would never fall on her, especially as Gregory doted on her. "You've left me with no choice but to sack you," Gregory announced with a look of disgust. "No, please, I need this job. Where will I go? I would never steal from you, sir." "You won't receive a reference from me, and if you don't leave immediately, I will have to fetch the constable and tell him about your thieving ways. You don't want to end up in the workhouse or jail, do you?" Paige's sobs grew louder at the thought of being thrown out onto the streets just before Christmas. "Wait, you can't treat her like this," Chloe cried. She looked at Emily, who merely smiled and tossed her blonde curls with disdain. "What else would you have Papa do?" Emily said silkily, "If it's not Paige who stole the money, then who else could it be?" Chloe took a deep breath, remembering the letter in her pocket. She had a way out, but Paige didn't. "It wasn't Paige who took the money. It was me," she announced. The words came out surprisingly easily, despite the fact that they weren't true. She flushed slightly under the weight of everyone's shocked looks. "You shouldn't sack Paige. She does a good job here," Chloe went on to say. Paige had been the only one to show her kindness, and she knew this was one way she could repay her for it and protect her future. "It was you?" Gregory shook his head, as though all his worst thoughts had been confirmed. "I should have known it." "I needed the money to buy a new gown," Chloe said firmly. "I've been sent a proposal for marriage by a man in Wyoming." "Marriage? Don't be so silly, Chloe. Who would want to marry you?" Emily scoffed. Chloe shrugged, beyond caring about her petty jealousy anymore. "I always thought there was something sneaky about you," Gregory spat. "I tolerated you under my roof only because of Mary, but now she's dead. I don't owe you anything. I want you out of here and never want to see you again. Go after your man in Wyoming, but don't even think about coming crawling back if it doesn't work out." Gregory scooped the money off the counter and strode into his office, slamming the door behind him without so much as a backward glance. "Marriage? You're a fool, Chloe. That's what you are." Emily flounced off, leaving Chloe and Paige alone. "You shouldn't have done that for me," Paige whispered hoarsely. "It's not true, is it? You didn't steal the money?" Chloe gave her a rueful smile, still trembling slightly from the bruising encounter and Gregory's ultimatum. "Of course not. We both know it was Emily. You deserve this job, Paige, as horrible as they are. I know how badly you need it, and I couldn't just stand there when you were about to be cast out." "Thank you," Paige said. She was crying again, but this time simply out of relief. "I'll be fine. I wasn't lying about the marriage proposal. I've been writing to a gentleman in Wyoming, and he's asked me to travel out to wed him. I'm going to be a mail-order bride." Paige threw her arms around Chloe and gave her a beaming smile through her tears. "I wish you all the luck in the world, but I sure am going to miss you. You have a good heart, and he's a lucky gentleman to have you." Chloe spent the rest of her evening packing up her few belongings in a carpet bag and lingering in her ma's room for a few moments. Without Mary there, it felt cold and empty, which made leaving slightly easier. She had decided that first thing in the morning, she would mail off her acceptance of Henry's proposal and then purchase her railroad ticket to travel west. The thought caused her stomach to stir with both excitement and terror. Just as she was getting ready for bed, there was a sharp knock at her door. It was Emily, and she marched in without waiting for Chloe to reply. "I'm glad you spoke up to say you stole the money," Emily said, her eyes blazing with the same look that told Chloe she was up to no good. "It will be good to have you out of our lives finally." "I agree," Chloe said softly, much to her stepsister's surprise. She wondered if Emily was going to admit the truth, that it was she who had taken the money, but Emily just gave her a thin smile as she caught sight of the packed bag on her bed. "I'll be leaving first thing in the morning, and then you'll never have to see me again," Chloe said. "I hope that pleases you." "Oh, it does," Emily replied. "Papa and I never really wanted you here." She turned on her heel and walked out. "To think that you had to resort to marrying a complete stranger," she added with a humorless chuckle. "But what if he discovers you're just a common thief, Chloe? Have you thought about that?" Chloe took a deep breath and climbed into bed. By the light of her night candle, she thought about the fact that it was her last night in the home she had known for so long, with the people she had always considered to be family. She could only hope Henry was as nice as he seemed to be in the letters. Chapter 6. Rocky River, Wyoming. Chloe stepped off the stagecoach for the first time in her new home and shivered. Rocky River was a small frontier town in Wyoming, and it was currently being battered by the first snow of the winter months. Chloe had her carpet bag next to her as she stood with her arms hugged around her. Her thin dress and old woolen shawl weren't quite the protection she needed from the snow, and she was losing feeling in her toes as the cold attacked them through her boots. The snow hadn't started when she left Boston, but now she felt as though she was in some kind of winter fairy tale, with every surface glistening white in the pale sunshine. "Get on, giddy up," the stagecoach driver called, flicking his whip over the horses' broad backs. He lifted his hand to wave farewell, leaving her standing alone. The town was eerily quiet in the snow, and there was a distinct lack of people outside. For one terrible moment, Chloe wondered whether she'd gotten off at the wrong place. Perhaps there was another Rocky River she didn't know about, where Henry was waiting for her. She took a deep breath and tightened her shawl. "This is no time to panic," she muttered. The stagecoach driver had told her this was the correct place and that most folks were probably inside, having been caught unawares by the snowstorm which had blown in overnight. Her mind was racing as she tried not to let worry set in. She only had the vaguest idea of what Mr. Stewart looked like, which made it difficult to decide if any of the few people out on the street could be him. The journey had taken nearly 2 weeks, and Chloe was all too aware that it was enough time for someone to change their mind. Her heart sank at the thought of Henry no longer wanting to marry her, especially after the way things had ended for her in Boston. Just as Chloe was beginning to think she'd been abandoned, she heard the sound of a cough behind her. She whirled around to find a tall man smiling bashfully down at her. He lifted his hat to reveal a mop of dark blonde hair beneath, and his warm brown eyes crinkled as he gave her a tentative nod. "My name is Henry Stewart. Would I be mistaken in thinking that you are Miss Chloe Fuller?" "Not at all, Mr. Stewart," Chloe said, smiling politely at him. Her heart beat a little faster with relief as she realized this was the man she had been writing to for so long. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "The pleasure is all mine," he said before glancing at her bag. "Would you allow me to take your bag for you?" Chloe nodded. and he swung it over his shoulder as though it weighed nothing before offering his arm for her to hold on to. She was impressed by his manners toward her, even if it felt slightly awkward. "Here, take my arm so that you don't slip on the snow," Henry said. His tone was pleasant and put her at ease straight away. Henry had told her in his letters that he was almost 28, and she stole a glance at him from under her bonnet as they crunched through the snow. He was half a head taller than her, and his wide shoulders and broad chest showed he was a man who was used to hard work. "Thank you," Chloe managed, suddenly feeling tongue-tied. "That's all right. I was thinking it would be nice to go get warm by the fire. Perhaps a cup of tea might do you some good after your journey." Chloe's eyes lit up at his suggestion. It was exactly what she felt she needed at that moment. And her initial anxieties melted away as Henry pointed out different businesses they walked past. Despite her initial impression that Rocky River was a small town, it seemed to be thriving and had all the different stores and supplies anyone would want. She started to relax a little, feeling that she was in safe hands. "The Rosebush Inn is a nice place to stop a while," Henry said, pointing to a cozy-looking place ahead. The snow had already been swept from the path that led to the front door, and smoke drifted up from the chimneys at either end. "It's a boarding house, and they serve food to travelers and locals alike." Once they were inside, Chloe took her bonnet off and gratefully sat on the chair he pulled out for her next to the stone fireplace. Instantly, Chloe could feel the heat warming her feet and the color returning to her cheeks. The wet hem of her gown steamed gently. She would be dry again in no time. She glanced around, thankful to see that other couples were frequenting the inn, as well as groups of single ladies who sat together. "This looks lovely," she said, giving Henry a shy smile. "It's not a hard-drinking sort of place," Henry said. His tone implied that he wouldn't approve of such a place even if she hadn't been with him, which she liked. She had heard too many tales of marriages being ruined by hard liquor. "I figured you would like it, as it's where other mail-order brides come to stay before getting married." "It's perfect. You're very thoughtful," Chloe said. She arranged her gloves on the table and blushed as she caught his eye. He was staring at her admiringly, which was something she wasn't used to. "Sorry, I'm forgetting my manners." He jumped up and returned to the table a moment later with 2 cups of hot tea. His hands looked large against the fine china cups, and she smiled to herself. "You should have let me fetch them," she said. "I'm not used to anyone waiting on me." "It's a poor day if I can't do something for you," Henry said with a chuckle. "My ma raised me to be polite, even though I've mostly only had my own company recently." "She sounds like a wonderful woman. My ma was the same," Chloe added, feeling a slight pang of grief for a moment. She sipped her tea, savoring the warmth returning to her fingers and toes. "How was your journey?" Henry pulled his seat closer to the table, his eyes barely leaving hers. "It was long, but the scenery was beautiful," Chloe said. She grimaced inwardly as she remembered the discomfort of the chugging train. The stagecoach to complete the final leg of her journey from Hudsonville had been rougher still, but she didn't want to sound ungrateful. He had paid for her fare after all. The other ladies on the train were friendly, and we all agreed we've never seen so much of our wonderful country before. "It sure is stunning here in Wyoming," Henry agreed after gulping down some tea. "You should see the sunrises from the ranch. It's like being in heaven some mornings, as if the Lord has painted a picture." Chloe smiled at his description. He spoke just like he had written in the letters. There was a soft passion to his tone that reassured her further about the kind of man she was going to marry. "Well, I suppose I should say thank you for writing to me and agreeing to this. I know it will be strange at first because it's such a change, but I hope it's not too difficult for you." "Thank you for writing to me, too," Chloe said. She shifted in her chair, wishing she could click her fingers and get past these first few awkward moments. The conversation felt far too polite for 2 people who were due to be married, but she knew love was something created over time. It couldn't be rushed. The irony was that once she reminded herself of this fact, she relaxed even more and felt the first frisson of something more between them. "Your letters were always the best part of my day," she confided. Henry looked pleased to hear it. "And your letters were for me, too," he said cheerfully. "It was the first thing I did when I came into town. Check if any letters had come from you, rather than wait for the mailman to ride out with them." "So your ranch is close by?" "It's perhaps a 30-minute journey by wagon," Henry said. "But don't worry, I have a blanket, so you'll be warm for the trip." Chloe nodded slowly. She had known that the ranch wouldn't be near the town, but the thought of being 30 minutes away from Rocky River stirred a new anxiety within her. "Don't worry, it's a lovely spot, and you won't be lonely," Henry said, as if reading her mind. "The neighbors are kind, and will come into town every week for supplies or to go to church. It'll take a little time to get used to it, but I'm sure you'll soon grow to love it as much as I do." "It's all still relatively new for you too, isn't it?" Chloe asked. At her question, she noticed that Henry's eyes lit up with pride in an endearing way. "Yes, it's all because I managed to strike it lucky and find some gold out on one of the ridges. I've only been at Green Oak Ranch for a few months, so there's still a lot to do to get the place how I want it. The cabin isn't very cozy yet either, but I figure a woman's touch would certainly turn that around." Chloe felt a sudden flush of heat in her cheeks at this first proper mention of their impending marriage. Her heart skipped a beat as their eyes met across the table again, but she also felt a sense of excitement at the prospect of turning the place into a home for them both. "I'm sure it's not as bad as you think," she said. Her eye was drawn to the window at the sight of fresh snow starting to fall. Henry followed her gaze. "I thought the snowstorm might be over, but it looks like we might get more." "A blizzard?" Chloe sounded alarmed at the thought. She was used to having everything she needed in one neighborhood in Boston. "They don't usually blow in until the new year, so we should be all right for a while. I have plenty of supplies at the ranch in case we get snowed in." He gave her a smile. "I was in two minds about whether it would be wise for you to travel during the winter and before Christmas, what with missing your family. Do you have a big celebration?" Chloe decided there was no point skirting around the truth if they were to get to know each other properly. "My ma was ill last year, so I didn't feel much in the mood to celebrate." "I'm so sorry to hear that." Chloe could only shrug in response. She blinked, feeling tears at the back of her eyes, and paused for a few moments before daring to speak again. "My stepfather liked to see everyone celebrating if it meant they purchased more presents from his emporium, but he never encouraged us to take more than an afternoon off. Well, me, I should say. He was different with his own daughter, Emily." Henry shot her a sympathetic smile. "Well, perhaps we can change that this year. It would be nice to make our first Christmas together memorable, even though it's still a bit of time away." Chloe felt her cheeks flushing at his kindness. In all her years in Boston, Gregory had never been this kind to her, not even on Christmas Day. "I don't care much for gifts," she said with a chuckle. "I would just like it to be filled with some joy." "I'm sure that can be arranged. My last few Christmases have been lonesome, so it seems like we want the same things: good company and simple pleasures." Chloe couldn't stop smiling at the prospect of finally having a Christmas she would want to remember. Since the passing of her ma, she hadn't thought she would be offered any joy in her life again. But Henry appeared to swoop into her life and fix things almost as soon as she had arrived. "We could have a nice joint of beef on Christmas Day. Perhaps we could even put up a Christmas tree soon. As I said, the living situation is still rather basic." "I don't mind about that one little bit," Chloe said, feeling happier than she had in a long time. "I'm looking forward to making the house a little more like a home for you." She appreciated that Henry was doing his best to ease her worries. There was just one thing remaining that she felt uneasy about: where she would be staying in the days before the wedding. Once again, it seemed as though he had read her thoughts. He cleared his throat. "I did want to talk a little about the wedding," Henry said. His tone of voice was suddenly much more hesitant. "We haven't set a date yet, and I think that's for the best. I want you to see the homestead first, and for you to get a feel for the ranch and what I have to offer you. It's all very well for me to tell you what Green Oak Ranch is like, but I figure you'd rather see it with your own two eyes." Chloe was surprised, but she quickly realized that Henry wasn't anything like Gregory and Emily, who had always just told her what to do. "Are you saying you're not sure I'll fit in?" "Not at all," Henry said hastily. "But ranch life doesn't suit everyone, and it wouldn't be right for me to force you into it. Take a look and see if you like it. You're still free to make your choice as to whether or not you want to marry me then, although I'm hoping you say yes," he added. His brown eyes crinkled in another smile that made Chloe's heart skip a beat again. "That is very kind of you," Chloe said. "I'm not used to such consideration." "This stepfather of yours doesn't sound very nice," Henry commented. He leaned forward. "I guess we should talk about where you can stay for a few nights while you decide." Before Chloe could reply, her attention was drawn to the sound of the front door opening. An icy chill from outside gusted through the room, and a burly man walked purposefully toward them. "Good afternoon, ma'am." The gentleman lifted his wide-brimmed Stetson hat, and his expression was hard to read. He turned slightly, and it was only at that moment that Chloe saw the glint of the badge pinned to his coat. The town sheriff had found her. "Good afternoon, Sheriff." Chloe's mouth went dry. She remembered Emily's parting words and wondered if this was her revenge. Had Gregory sent the sheriff to arrest her for stealing his money? Was her new life about to turn to dust before it had even begun? Chapter 7. Chloe could only hope that her face didn't reflect the panic that was rising in her chest. The star-shaped badge glinted again in the lamplight again as he regarded her. "Have you heard from Gregory, my stepfather?" she asked hesitantly. The sheriff's eyebrows twitched, but this time he looked confused. "Gregory? No, ma'am." He gave her a brief nod. "I'm Sheriff Jackson. Nice to make your acquaintance." His gaze swiveled slightly, and he stepped closer to Henry. "Good afternoon, Mr. Stewart," he continued, his voice uncomfortably loud. Chloe shrank into her seat, making sure to avoid eye contact with anyone else in the room. "Sheriff Jackson," Henry said, and nodded his head politely. "What brings you to the Rosebush Inn? Is there something I can help you with?" "There's something I'd like to discuss with you," the sheriff said. Chloe dared to look up at the piercing blue eyes of the sheriff. They were in the shadow of his hat, making him appear even more menacing, and her mind raced as to how she would explain herself to Henry. What if he doesn't believe me? She could hardly bear to think about losing him so soon, just as she had felt their relationship starting to blossom. "What is it? I haven't heard about any trouble," Henry responded. His brow pulled down into a frown, and he shot Chloe a look with a slight shrug to indicate that he was puzzled. "Perhaps I should come with you?" Chloe started to stand up, but the sheriff shook his head. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am. I'd rather we talk privately in my office, Mr. Stewart." Chloe didn't know whether to feel relieved or not. Was Sheriff Jackson going to warn Henry not to marry her? Did he want to exclude her to save his embarrassment as he revealed her terrible deeds? She wondered whether to blurt out there, and then that she had lied about the theft to save Paige's position at the Emporium. "Well, yes, of course," Henry muttered. This time, it was his turn to look uncomfortable, as several people at nearby tables stared and then whispered to one another. Chloe glanced between the two men, but the sheriff's expression was blandly neutral. She thought back over her brief time in Henry's company and wondered if perhaps she had been a little too quick to deem Henry a good man. Had he done something which would put him on the wrong side of the law? She had so many questions, but nobody to ask. "Let's go then," Sheriff Jackson said gruffly. Chloe felt a surge of fear about her predicament. If Henry had committed a crime, there was a chance that he could be locked up. Chloe felt her heart sink at the thought of being left on her own in the town she barely knew, but her instincts were still crying out that he wasn't that sort of person. "I'll follow you out," Henry said as he started to stand from his chair. "Apologies, I realized that I didn't introduce you to my fiancé. Sheriff Jackson, this is Miss Chloe Fuller. She's just arrived here from Boston as a mail-order bride." Chloe flashed the sheriff a pleasant smile despite the terror that she was feeling. Henry then turned to her. "I'm sure it's nothing and will be dealt with quickly," Henry said to her in a much softer tone. Chloe could tell he was trying to reassure her, but it wasn't working. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Fuller," the sheriff said. He made no effort to reiterate what Henry had said about the matter being sorted out quickly. Chloe tried to push those thoughts away, but her anxiety continued to rise. She had no choice but to shake his outstretched hand. Chloe hoped it wasn't obvious she was trembling slightly, for she was still terrified that her own past would catch up with her. "A pleasure to meet you too," she said in a mutter. Chloe couldn't rule out the possibility that Emily would try to stir up trouble just because she was on the other side of the country. The girl harbored so much spite for her that Chloe wouldn't be surprised if she tried to spoil things for her as she settled into her new life. She had only been trying to do the right thing by sparing Paige from the wrath of her stepfamily, but Chloe had left herself vulnerable as a result. "I'll be waiting here for you, Henry," she murmured, as Henry gave her an awkward smile. She sat down again hastily, feeling suddenly weak with worry as she watched the forbidding-looking lawman of Rocky River lead her future husband away and out of her sight. Chloe continued sipping her tea for a few minutes, wishing that the ground would swallow her up. But before she had a chance to gather her thoughts, 2 more people approached the table, their faces etched with concern. "Hello, Miss Fuller. We hear you're new in town," the woman said, giving her a friendly smile. "I'm Suzanne Perez, and this is my husband, Eli. We run the Rosebush Inn here in Rocky River." "I'm Chloe," she said quietly, not sure of what they wanted with her yet. "Do you know what that commotion was about?" Suzanne asked. Chloe glanced between them. "I'm not really sure," she admitted. "The sheriff wanted to talk with Henry, so he went with him. I think it was some kind of inquiry that the sheriff believes he can help with." "I see," Eli said slowly. He frowned before sharing a look of confusion with his wife. "Sheriff Jackson is a fine, upstanding man of the law. Henry's new to the Rocky River area. He's only been here a couple of months, and nobody really knows him." Chloe frowned at what the man was insinuating, whether it was intended or not. She had thought they would come over to offer her some comfort, but she had clearly been mistaken. "I'm sure it's nothing, and Henry reassured me that it will be dealt with in no time," Chloe replied, leaping to his defense. Her voice sounded more confident than she felt inside, but she was determined not to show her worry. Henry was to be her husband, and she knew that to be a dutiful wife, she should defend his honor in his absence. The couple exchanged another look, and Chloe took the opportunity to glance out the window at the darkening landscape. The late month of the year meant it was growing darker earlier, which filled her with dread as she waited for Henry to return. "Well, we'll leave you be," Suzanne said. She picked up the empty teacups and wiped a cloth over the table. "Let me know if you'd like something to eat. I'm sure he'll be back soon." As Chloe watched Eli and Suzanne hurry away to serve their other guests, she came to the realization that not only was she an outsider, but Henry was too. She wondered how they would ever fit into a town where even he was classed as an outsider after living there for a few months, and could imagine Emily's mocking laughter if she could see her now. A few minutes later, the door opened again, bringing with it yet another burst of cold air, and Chloe's hopes lifted, thinking that it might be Henry back again already. But her hope was short-lived. A gray-haired woman hobbled into the room, her eyes darting around until they finally landed on Chloe. She shrank back again. It seemed as though everyone was searching for her, and she had no idea why. "I'm looking for a Miss Fuller," the woman said as she hobbled toward her table surprisingly fast. "Is that you? Are you meeting Mr. Henry Stewart here?" "That's me," Chloe said quietly. She didn't like all of the unwanted attention that arriving in a new town had brought her. "Ah, that's wonderful news." The woman broke into a smile and pulled a chair out to sit next to the fire without being invited. "I'm glad you hadn't left already." "I'm sorry, who are you?" Chloe decided she had to be forthright as her day was getting stranger by the minute. "Joyce Brooker," the woman said proudly. Chloe wasn't sure if it was a name she was supposed to know, but the way the woman said it implied it was. "I'm neighbors with Henry, his closest neighbor, actually." The mention of Henry brought Chloe a bit more comfort, though she was still uneasy about trusting anyone anymore. "I own a small plot of land next to Green Oak Ranch. That's Henry's ranch. I understand that you are going to be his wife?" "Yes, I came all the way from Boston," Chloe said. How much do you like him? Joyce asked with an eager gaze. It must be a lot for you to have agreed to move all the way across the country to be with him. Chloe was slightly taken aback by the question, but she quickly regained her composure. I like him very much, she answered. He's been very kind and generous to me already. Even today, when I first met him in person, he's given me lots of hope that we're going to have a happy marriage together. She paused and bit her lip, wondering how much she should tell the woman, but then figured in a small town like this, she might already know. The thing is, the sheriff came in here looking for him. I'm not sure what it's about, but being questioned by the sheriff is serious. It has me worried, and I have no idea how long he might be. There was something about the older woman that put Chloe at more ease. She felt as though she could open up to her. Chloe wasn't sure if it was the deep lines on Joyce's face that were a testament to the many years she had spent smiling, or simply the way that she made even that small corner of the inn feel more welcoming. I can imagine that such a situation would worry you, Joyce agreed. It would worry me too if I had just met my future husband, and now he's being questioned by Sheriff Jackson. She gave Chloe a shrewd look. Henry hasn't been here long, but I'm a good judge of character, and I know that he isn't the sort of young man to go around breaking the law. Chloe felt a wave of relief wash over her from those reassuring words. Hearing them from someone who knew Henry was better still. I'm guessing that you've lived here longer than Henry? Yes, Joyce chuckled. I've lived here for more years than I care to remember. Rocky River is certainly a nice place to settle. And I'm pleased to see that more and more young couples are choosing to come out here and create a life for themselves. The town has certainly picked up in popularity in recent years. You'll settle in just fine, she added airily. I can already tell. It's very different to Boston. I can only imagine, Joyce said with a nod. You'll be pleased to know we don't have too much trouble with bandits or outlaws. No, the main things you'll have to worry about are the bears and mountain lions that can sometimes get a bit curious. Chloe stared at her with wide eyes. Bears and mountain lions? She wondered if Joyce was teasing her. Don't worry, my dear. Henry will show you how to use a rifle soon enough. You can even fire off a warning shot, and the animals shouldn't give you any bother, Joyce said with a grin. The scariest thing back home was probably my stepfather, Chloe remarked. I hadn't given much thought to dealing with that sort of wildlife. I hope I'll be able to manage. You look like a sensible young woman. I have high hopes that you'll enjoy being at Green Oak Ranch as much as your Henry does. It's a wonderful place to raise a family. There was a lull in the conversation as some more guests arrived, and Suzanne bustled around getting them booked in. Chloe warmed to the cozy atmosphere of the inn. Her first thoughts had been that Suzanne and Eli were being nosy, but now she decided that perhaps folks were just friendlier than she was used to. In a small community where most folks knew each other, she guessed it was inevitable. I wonder how long Henry will be with Sheriff Jackson, Chloe murmured as she glanced once more out the window. It would be dark soon, and she shivered slightly at the thought of being left alone again once Joyce had left. Suzanne came over with a fresh pot of coffee and 2 mugs. Your usual, Joyce, she said, placing them on the table. Glad to see you're keeping Miss Fuller company. I meant to inquire before, Chloe spoke up. Do you have a small room here that I could stay in? Maybe for a night or 2? Suzanne looked apologetic. I'm afraid we're fully booked until the end of the week. We had a rush of ladies arriving before Christmas, you see. Would you like to take a room then? Chloe wasn't even sure if she had the money to pay for staying at the inn, but she couldn't see what other choice she had. I guess I'll consider it, she responded carefully. Let me know when you've decided, Suzanne said. Chloe waited until Suzanne had left, then turned back to Joyce to continue the conversation. Do you know if anyone else stays on the ranch? Henry suggested I might like to look at it before booking a wedding to be sure I like it, but I can't stay there without some sort of chaperone. Perhaps he has a housekeeper? She sounded doubtful. Of course, I completely understand, Joyce said. Unfortunately, Henry lives alone. But just for your peace of mind, I want you to know that he's not the sort of man who would ever take advantage of you in that way. The problem is that we were just talking about where I could stay until the wedding. But that's when Sheriff Jackson interrupted us. Do you know of anywhere else I could stay for a modest price? Chloe thought about her limited funds and how humiliating it would be to have to barter for a bed for the night. You're always welcome to stay with me until the wedding, Joyce suggested. As I told you, I live right next door to Green Oak Ranch, so it would be perfect. You'd be able to spend as much time with your fiancé as you like. Her eyes twinkled mischievously. I hope you don't turn him down. He'll make a good husband. Chloe blushed and then reached across to squeeze Joyce's hand. Thank you so much. I was starting to worry about where I could stay, and I'll be sure to help with your chores. I don't want to be a burden to you. It's my pleasure, besides. I appreciate the company, Joyce replied warmly. It can get lonesome, especially in the winter. I'll enjoy getting to know you, and I'm sure that any companion of Henry's can be trusted. He's a sweet man, and I trust that he has found a good wife in you. That's very kind of you to say, and I'll help around the ranch as much as possible to repay you for your kindness. I'm sure we can figure out something, Joyce said, waving her concerns away. She peered through the window with a worried frown. Time's gotten away with us. I can see fresh snow falling, so we must be off quickly. The track up to the ranches is usually one of the first to be cut off if the snowfall persists. Chloe sat beside Joyce on the buckboard wagon seat, feeling a little more reassured by her situation. The snow was falling much faster than she had anticipated, but it was a rather calming sight as they made their way up the town's main street and toward the ranches that Joyce had been speaking about with such fondness. It's such a beautiful place, Chloe exclaimed as the town gave way to beautiful rural scenery. The rolling hills were already thick with pillowy mounds of snow, and she thought she had never seen anything so wonderful. I'm glad you think so. It will be quite the change from life in Boston, but I'm sure you'll fit in with it all in no time. You've found a good man in Henry. I'm positive he'll keep you safe out here. I just hope everything with Sheriff Jackson gets sorted out quickly. It was all going so well until he turned up. I'm very grateful you found me instead. I'm sure it's nothing, Joyce said. We just have to trust things will work out fine. Everything will seem much better in the morning after you've had a chance to rest. Chapter 8. Henry followed the sheriff into his office, still with no further clue as to what the man wanted with him. Take a seat, Mr. Stewart. Thank you. Henry sat down on the other side of the sheriff's desk and took his hat off, resting it on top of a pile of papers. He risked a glance around the room. There was a stove in the corner with a coffee pot on top, and several tattered posters nailed to the wall of men who were wanted in the district. So, where did you come from before moving to Rocky River? Henry was surprised by the opening question. It was the type of thing they could have talked about at the Rosebush Inn. He paused before answering, but Sheriff Jackson's face was still inscrutable. A good attribute for a man of the law, he thought to himself. Well, I moved around quite a bit, getting work where I could, Henry began. It was a tough 5 years or so, but then the lure of prospecting for gold had gotten under my skin, and I ended up moving to Drover's Creek. I see, the sheriff said. He was nodding slowly and sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Henry. And that's where you had your success? With the gold? Yes, sir. You can imagine how rumors get around in the frontier lands. Jackson paused as though he expected Henry to say more. I heard a rumor that you came across a large seam of gold, and it made you a rich man overnight, the sheriff continued. Well, I was able to afford to buy my ranch, if that's what you mean? Henry's tone was self-deprecating, hoping to downplay his success and wealth. You probably know that Green Ranch isn't very grand, and there were plenty of men who were much more successful than me at striking it big with finding gold. He shook his head slightly. If anything, my find was pretty modest, which suited me just fine. Henry was itching to ask the sheriff who had been discussing this with him. It sounded as though he had been the subject of town gossip without even realizing it. He had figured there would be some risk of it moving to a small town where most of the inhabitants already knew one another, but word had spread faster than he thought. I wouldn't say that Green Oak Ranch is small by any means, the sheriff countered, raising his eyebrows. Sure, the previous owner abandoned it when he headed to California, but I remember when it was quite the productive piece of land around here. Enough to make a decent living. Well, I'll try my best with it, Henry said. I have plenty of plans to expand my herd of cattle and grow a few crops. I won't be abandoning the place if that's what you're thinking. He was trying his best to remain polite, but the way Sheriff Jackson was looking at him made his stomach clench uneasily. Mr. Stewart, have you ever heard of a man called Blake Taylor? It sounds familiar, but I guess it's a rather common name, Henry said honestly. There were so many men coming and going around Drover's Creek. It's difficult to remember all of their names. He paused to cast his mind back, but couldn't come up with anything. I should probably explain that I lived away from the main camp in an old shack. The hard drinking and fighting at the camps didn't appeal to me. They thought I was a bit of a loner, but mingling with men like that ain't how I like to spend my time. Uh-huh. Henry could tell the sheriff wasn't convinced. Why do you ask? I've gotten word from Drover's Creek that a certain Blake Taylor was beaten fairly badly a little while ago, not long after he made a lucky find of a considerable amount of gold. The gold was stolen from him after his beating. Do you know anything about it? Sheriff Jackson's question was direct, and he looked Henry straight in the eye as he asked it. No, I didn't hear about that, but it sounds awful. I hope he's all right, Henry replied. He was now painfully aware of every hesitation in his voice, wondering if it made him sound guilty of the terrible crime. There were often fights and petty thefts when the men were drinking. Hard liquor and good manners aren't the best of friends. But as I said, I kept to myself in the evenings and rarely went to the saloon for just that reason. Interesting. Sheriff Jackson leaned forward and rested his hands lightly on his desk. His gaze was even more inquisitive than before. I find it strange that you didn't stay to see if you could find more gold, he said, changing the direction of the questions again. How so? Henry asked with a frown. Well, there are still men finding gold at Drover's Creek now, aren't there? Which proves there's more in the area. It seems curious to me that a man like yourself would walk away when you know there's still more gold to be found. You could have stayed and made double the amount of money, perhaps even triple. Henry allowed himself a smile as he shook his head. That's a fair comment, but I'm not that sort of man, you see. But leaving gold in the ground? Are you sure? Sheriff, I'm not sure if you've ever spoken to many prospectors. The days are long and strenuous, especially under the hot sun. It makes every joint in your body ache, and by the end of the day, you're drenched in sweat. You can go weeks, months, with nothing to show for it. I always told myself that I only wanted enough to buy my ranch. Henry shrugged. I know plenty of men who practically went mad with greed. But for me, my dream was to find just enough to have a ranch of my own like my pa had. I found my gold, sold it, and left the place as quickly as possible to come here. That's it. I suppose that's a fair enough reason to get away, the sheriff conceded. Unfortunately, the records of who was coming and going aren't too good, which is why we're still looking for suspects. I guess you found my name on the register? Henry dared to ask. The sheriff nodded his head slowly and pursed his lips before speaking again. I'm afraid so. That's why I had to call you in to see if you knew anything. If I may ask, why has it taken so long for this to come to light? What do you mean? You said this attack and robbery happened a few months back. Why are you only asking me about it now? For a moment, Henry wondered whether he had overstepped the mark as Sheriff Jackson's expression hardened. Blake Taylor was beaten so badly that he nearly died as a result of his injuries and has been making a slow recovery ever since, Jackson explained, still watching him closely. At first, we thought we were simply looking for his attackers, but then it came to light that he had also been robbed, which sheds a lot of light on why it happened. It's only recently that he was well enough to tell us what happened. I'm sorry, Sheriff. I wish that I could tell you more. But I don't know anything about it, Henry said firmly. He wished there was a better way he could prove his innocence, but Henry had nothing. He could see how it looked, and he could tell that the sheriff was still suspicious of him. Fine, you can go now. Sheriff Jackson stood up abruptly and opened the door to show him out. Thank you, Henry spluttered, caught off guard again. "I need to be getting back to my fiancé. Poor Chloe must be wondering what's taken so long." Henry hurried through the snow back to the Rosebush Inn, trying to put Sheriff Jackson's probing questions and insinuations from his mind. His heart lifted at the thought of seeing Chloe once more, though he had to admit he was nervous about what she would say. It didn't look promising that her new fiancé had been taken away for questioning by the local sheriff within hours of her arrival. Henry could understand if she might have some questions of her own. He opened the door and swiftly stepped into the warmth, looking hastily around the room to find her. The table by the fire was now occupied by two matronly ladies, and there was no sign of Chloe. A wave of disappointment crashed over him as he imagined the worst. She had left him already, and through no fault of his own. "Are you looking for Chloe?" Suzanne called, bustling toward him. "She went with your neighbor, Joyce Brooker, because it was getting dark, and we don't have any spare rooms available for guests right now." Relief flooded through him. "Thank you." Henry nodded and tipped his hat to the innkeeper's wife. "I told Joyce that Chloe was arriving today, but I didn't realize she was coming into town. It must have been to get supplies in case she gets snowed in. You know what Joyce is like. She offered to let Miss Fuller stay with her for the time being." Henry was straight back out in the snow after a hasty goodbye to Eli and Suzanne. He felt reassured that Chloe was with Joyce so that she would be right next door to his ranch. As he clambered into his wagon and started the journey home, he thought about how strangely the day had turned out. He realized he had been so eager to meet Chloe that he had completely overlooked where she might stay until their actual wedding. But thankfully, Joyce was a good friend, and he knew she would appreciate the company. Joyce had helped him no end when he first bought the ranch. Her kindness and wisdom had been invaluable to him, and he was sure that he wouldn't have been able to navigate the last few months quite as well without her help. Hearing that Chloe would be staying with Joyce until the wedding was an idea he wished he'd come up with himself. It would ease her into life on a ranch, and that was important to him. By the time he rumbled up the track their two ranches shared, it was almost completely dark. The snow was starting to drift, and he wouldn't be surprised if they found themselves cut off in the morning. Instead of turning toward his own homestead, he took the narrower track that led to Joyce's small plot of land, glad to see a lamp shining in the window of her cozy log cabin. "Is Chloe okay?" Henry asked as soon as the door opened. "I can't thank you enough for taking care of her, Joyce. Sheriff Jackson kept me longer than I thought he would." "She's already gone to bed," Joyce explained as she hovered in her doorway. "The poor girl was so exhausted after her long journey. I told her she should get to sleep early rather than wait up for news." "Thank you again," Henry said. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling awkward. This wasn't how he'd wanted Chloe's first night in Rocky River to be, even though he knew Joyce would take good care of her. "That's okay. You know I'm always here to help," she said, flashing her usual friendly smile. "What did the sheriff want to talk to you about?" "It was nothing," he mumbled. Henry wasn't sure of the best way to answer that question. The sheriff hadn't specified that any of the information was confidential, but he also didn't want to be responsible for spreading gossip. Joyce gave him a shrewd look. "I'm glad to hear it," she replied. "It was about something from where I lived before coming here. I think he just wanted a little reassurance from me because I'm still so new to the town. It's clear that I plan on staying, especially now that Chloe's here too, so I was more than happy to talk to him." Henry hoped that he was conveying the sense that he was a man of good morals. Joyce's opinion of him mattered, and he didn't want her to think badly of him. "That sounds like it's all cleared up then. You can start making plans for your wedding. Will you let Chloe know that I'll call on her in the morning? Provided the snow isn't too deep, I'd like to show her around the ranch." "I sure will," Joyce said. If she had any suspicions about what Henry had previously said regarding the sheriff, she kept them to herself. Henry bade her good night, wishing that he'd had one more chance to see Chloe again. But the thought of showing her around his ranch the following day filled him with cheer. There was something about her heart-shaped face and kind eyes which was already tugging on his heart, and he only hoped she felt the same way. in spite of Sheriff Jackson's meeting. Chapter 9. Chloe blinked awake, feeling refreshed, but also momentarily confused. She glanced around the unfamiliar surroundings with a frown, her mind not connecting her with where she was for a moment. But then everything came flooding back to her. The stagecoach journey, meeting Henry, and then Sheriff Jackson's unwelcome intrusion to take Henry away for questioning. Her heart sank a little as she tried to justify the situation. Even though she wanted to make light of it, the thought of marrying someone who had a tendency to get on the wrong side of the law wasn't something she wanted in her future. Give the man a chance. The thought pulled her out of her gloom, and she jumped out of bed to look out of the window, shivering as the cold air whispered around her ankles. Any discomfort was instantly forgotten at the scene which awaited her as she pulled the drapes open. To her amazement, everything had been covered in a thick blanket of snow overnight, and she stared in awe at the view. Of course, she had seen snow before in Boston, but never out in the wilderness. Icicles hung from every surface and shimmered in the morning sun, making the world outside sparkle with blinding whiteness. Chloe quickly dressed and thought about how cozy the small log cabin was as she went to look for Joyce. It had a homely sense about it, a warmth that came from the smell of fresh herbs and a roaring fire in one corner of the main living room. She could imagine herself being Henry's wife and living in a similar-sized place, though she had yet to see it. "Did you have a nice sleep?" Joyce was adding a piece of wood to the fire and smiled as she saw Chloe. "I did, thank you," Chloe answered. "The best night's sleep I've had for a long time." "I'm glad to hear it. I figured you must have been exhausted after traveling the breadth of the country. You'll soon find out that being out in the fresh air helps you sleep as well. I wouldn't swap living here for anywhere." "Your cabin is very quaint and comfortable," Chloe said shyly. "I hope I can make Henry's log cabin as nice as this. He mentioned it was still a bit rough and ready." Joyce chuckled. "That's one way of putting it. It mainly needs a woman's touch. You'll have the place looking better in no time. How are you feeling about your new life out here now that you've slept on it? I know it's still early days, of course." Something about the old woman made Chloe feel comfortable sharing her thoughts. "I'm a little nervous about it all," Chloe confided. "Seeing Henry being let out by the sheriff wasn't very reassuring. I can see why it might worry you, but don't jump to conclusions. That's all I can suggest. Like I said before, Henry is a good man, and I don't see what he could have done that would land him in any trouble." "I just wish I knew what it was about," Chloe said quietly. "Henry has been a kind neighbor to me," Joyce replied. "Don't let the sheriff's meeting spoil the beginning of your relationship with him." "I'll try not to think about it today," Chloe said, feeling happier at her host's reassurances. "Now then," Joyce said as she added one more log to the fire for good measure. "Let's have some breakfast, shall we? You can't look around Green Oak Ranch with your fiancé on an empty stomach." Just as Chloe had finished her fried eggs and a thick slice of Joyce's freshly baked bread with 2 cups of coffee, the muffled sound of a horse and wagon approaching outside caught her attention. "That'll be Henry." Joyce chuckled as she hobbled over to the door to answer it. "He must have gotten through his chores extra fast to be here calling on you so early." Chloe's heart beat faster as she watched the door open to reveal her husband-to-be. His cheeks were red from the cold, and he brushed the snow from his shoulders, grinning broadly as he came in. "I hope I haven't disturbed you?" He took his hat off and ran a hand through his hair in a gesture that Chloe was already recognizing meant that he was nervous. "Come and sit by the fire. We've just had breakfast. Have you eaten? I know you sometimes forget," Joyce said, tutting as she closed the door behind him. "I sure have. Good morning, Chloe," Henry said, nodding his head politely. "Good morning." Chloe could hear the timidness in her own voice, but she couldn't help it. He sat a respectable distance from her, though Chloe wished that he would come closer. "I came as soon as I could this morning," he explained. Chloe could sense a hesitance in his voice that hadn't been there the day before. "I want to show you around the homestead if you would like to see the place." He glanced around Joyce's cabin. It's not as nice as this, but hopefully you'll agree it has potential." "I think that's a grand idea," Joyce said. "You should have seen my log cabin when I first arrived. It was full of dust and spider webs. You'll see that Henry's place isn't as bad as he thinks it is, and it's good to make your own mark on it." Chloe and Henry exchanged a smile as Joyce beamed at them, clearly wanting the marriage to be a success. "I'd love to come with you," Chloe said. Her heart fluttered whenever she made eye contact with Henry. There was just something about his rugged features and warm brown eyes that she found irresistible. It was nothing that she had ever felt for a man before. After Henry had a mug of coffee, Chloe pulled on one of Joyce's thick winter coats and her shawl. Even though it had stopped snowing and the sun was out, it was bitterly cold. Her cheeks flushed at the feel of Henry's hands on her back as he helped her up into the wagon. The seat was narrow, and she could feel the warmth coming from Henry's solid body next to hers as the horse clopped forward. "There's no need to rush back. Take as long as you want," Joyce called, waving from her small front porch. "I enjoyed talking to you yesterday," Chloe commented as the horse plodded through the snow. She could barely take her eyes off the stunning scenery. "It would be nice to know a little more about your past, if you don't mind talking about it. I know we spoke about it in the letters, but hearing it from you will help me understand your love of ranching." Henry's tone was happy as he pointed out various parts of his ranch. But then he grew quieter. "I wouldn't say my past is very interesting. If anything, it's a little sad. My parents died when I was younger, and I haven't seen my brother John in nearly 5 years." He frowned slightly, and Chloe wondered whether she shouldn't have asked. "You must miss him," she said, giving him a sympathetic smile. "John didn't take losing our family ranch well. He turned to drink, and that caused him to fall in with some bad company. I really do hope he's doing okay. The last that I heard, he was simply drifting from one low-paid job to another. I wish it hadn't turned out that way, and we were still in touch. He's the only living family that I have left, after all, but it clearly isn't meant to be. We've chosen different paths, I guess." "I'm so sorry to hear that," Chloe said. "I've also lost a lot of the people who are closest to me." "Really?" "Yes. My ma was widowed, and the family who took me in, my step-family, never really wanted me around. My stepsister Emily made that very clear from the beginning. Then, when Ma passed away, I knew that staying with Gregory and Emily would do me no good. I was going to have to find a way to take my own path and give myself a new future away from them." Chloe skirted over the part where she had confessed to stealing money from them in order to save Paige from losing her job. She wasn't sure that it would be a good thing to admit to the man that she planned on marrying, especially when he had already been in conversation with the local sheriff. "I suppose we were both after a fresh start. It's good that we have similar reasons to end up at Rocky River," Henry said with a slight chuckle to lighten the mood. Chloe smiled back at him, entranced with the way he fitted into the landscape as though he belonged there. It felt good that they had something in common, and she was relieved she could stop wondering whether her past would catch up with her. The rolling hills, backed by mountains, couldn't fail to impress Chloe. She could see where Henry had already improved his fences in spite of the snowdrifts and started to get an inkling of why he loved the place so much. "Are those your barns and corrals?" she asked, as a cluster of buildings came into sight. "Uh-huh. I had to mend the barn roofs as a priority, but they're dry and watertight now. And those are my first cattle," he added. His face glowed with pride as he pointed to a small herd of shaggy animals, which were happily eating hay that he had put out for them. Chloe took Henry's arm as he led her up the steps to the log cabin. He had cleared the snow, which was thoughtful, but he sounded nervous again. "And here's the cabin," Henry announced as he opened the front door. From the outside, it looked very much like Joyce's home, if a little larger. However, the interior caused Chloe to falter as she glanced around. The furnishings were basic, offering no warmth or coziness to the room, and there weren't even drapes on some of the windows. Chloe took a deep breath, realizing that this was the woman's touch that Henry and Joyce said was needed. "Like I said, it's pretty basic." Henry sounded apologetic and twisted his hat nervously in his hands. "I love it. Chloe said with a hint of laughter, genuinely meaning it. All it needs is some rag rugs, some drapes to keep the cold out, and maybe a good clean. Her boots clacked loudly on the bare floorboards, and she felt a ripple of excitement at the idea of making the place a proper home. That's what I was thinking, but I figured you would know more about that sort of thing. Running the ranch is something I understand much more than making a house cozy. Hearing Henry say that warmed Chloe's heart. He'd already thought of a way that she could be of use so that she wasn't simply sitting around or idle. I'm sure I can come up with a few suggestions that could help, she said, smiling widely at him. Also, Joyce said she has some spare furniture in her barn that we can use if we like. Henry followed her around the room, starting to see it with fresh eyes himself. Chloe's enthusiasm was infectious, and he could already imagine having a Christmas tree in the corner and the smell of delicious cooking wafting from the kitchen. I'm feeling really positive about Green Oak Ranch now that you're here, he said happily. I'm going to expand the number of cattle and sow wheat in the spring. It's going to be hard work, but it's in my blood, Chloe. I hope you aren't feeling too daunted at the thought of how much there is to do. Quite the opposite. It seems like your ranch has a lot of potential, and I hope I'll be able to help you, Chloe marveled. I'm excited to learn more about how it all works. It would be my pleasure to teach you, Henry said. His gaze softened as their eyes locked for a moment. Chloe's pulse quickened, and the air between them crackled with something she couldn't define. All she knew was how much she longed to be held in his strong arms, but she realized it wouldn't be appropriate yet. They were still just getting to know each other. Will you show me the barns and your animals? Chloe asked, feeling flustered. I may as well start learning straight away. She smiled up at him, excited by the prospect of the weeks ahead of them. By the time the sun was beginning to sink in the sky, Henry couldn't believe how well the day had gone. He couldn't stop a grin from spreading across his face every time he thought about Chloe. She was the woman he had envisioned himself finding, and her interest in how the ranch worked only reinforced that. I'm glad that you're starting to see the ranch as I do, Henry remarked. There's a lot to do before we can make it a home, but it's all worthwhile knowing that you're willing to help me. I was never allowed to make such changes back home. My stepsister treated me more like a maid than part of the family, so I never had the chance to make a place a proper home. I'm looking forward to it. Then you will have as much freedom as you wish, Henry declared. He could tell by the way that she spoke about her family back home that there weren't many fond memories, and he wanted to give her the life that someone with a kind soul like hers deserved. The day had gotten away from them, and Henry was beginning to feel slightly disheartened as he walked her back to Joyce's house from his wagon. He was enjoying Chloe's company so much that he didn't want to part from her, even if it was just for the evening. Shall I ask Joyce if you could join us for dinner? I'm sure she wouldn't mind, Chloe said. She speaks so highly of you that I imagine she'd be more than happy to have you around. Henry nodded eagerly. That would be lovely. I am slightly envious that the two of you have one another for company while I have to go back to my cabin, he admitted. Henry wondered if his honesty put her off, but Chloe only continued to smile at him. Well, I'm sure that it won't be for much longer. He let out a slight laugh of relief at her comment. Every sign that Chloe was giving him was reassurance that she was going to agree to become his wife soon. While I'm here, I'll chop more wood for Joyce. I like to help with her chores because she's been so good to me. I couldn't have wished for a better neighbor. Just as they were approaching Joyce's log cabin, the sudden sound of muffled hoofbeats cut through the peaceful atmosphere. The rider was galloping toward them with some urgency, and Henry saw a look of worry flit across Chloe's face as she wondered who it might be. Who is it? Chloe whispered. I don't know. Joyce doesn't get many visitors, especially when the weather is like this. He stepped protectively in front of Chloe, hoping it wasn't Sheriff Jackson. The rider's face was obscured by a scarf tied around the lower half of his face. He reined his horse to a halt and started to dismount. Who are you? Henry called out. Birds clattered up from the trees at his shout, and he could see there was something familiar about the man. "Howdy, Henry," the man drawled, pulling his scarf down. He walked toward them, and Henry's mouth gaped open with shock. "It can't be," he muttered. "John?" He knew that dark blonde hair anywhere. It was a signature of his family. But this wasn't a face that he had expected to see any time soon. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" Henry asked as he took a few steps closer. "That's no way to greet your brother after 5 long years, is it?" John said, laughing off the questions. John's grip was firm as he shook his brother's hand, but Henry still wasn't sure what to make of his brother turning up unannounced after years of not speaking to him. Memories of his drunken, reckless behavior came flooding back, and he wasn't sure whether to be glad he had come back into his life or not. "And who is this lovely lady?" John continued. His gaze raked up and down Chloe with a boldness that Henry didn't appreciate. "This is Chloe. We're going to be married soon," Henry said quickly. "Well then, I suppose congratulations are in order," John said, giving her a sly smile that seemed overfamiliar. Henry turned to see Chloe glancing down shyly and felt a sharp stab of jealousy. He wasn't sure why, from the short interaction, but there was something about it that didn't sit well with him. "John, why have you come here?" This was no time to dance around the subject. His brother turned his attention back to him with a sigh. "I've decided it's time to put right the wrongs from the past, Henry. You'll be pleased to know I've been mending my ways," he explained. "It's just you and me left in, and we should try to be some sort of family, don't you think?" "You've changed?" Henry wasn't sure what to make of John's words. His brother had fallen so low after they'd lost the ranch that Henry found it hard to believe he'd given up the drink. "Sure, I'm like a new man," John said cheerfully. "It's lucky I managed to find you before it got dark," he continued. "I heard you have a ranch, but knowing where to find you wasn't easy. Are you planning to stay?" "If you'll have me," John said, flashing a smile. Although he still didn't know if his brother was telling the truth. Henry knew that he couldn't leave him out in the snow. While it didn't exactly feel like a choice, he nodded his head slowly in agreement. "Okay, you can stay with me on my ranch," Henry said. John clapped Henry on his back and then rubbed his hands together. "My brother has a good heart, doesn't he?" he said, winking at Chloe, which made her blush again. "How about something hot to eat, Henry? I'm starving, and we've got so much to catch up on." Henry managed a small smile. His parents had raised him to always see the best in folks, but John had taken a different path than him. And the last time Henry had seen him, he had vowed not to let John's trail of disruption and lies come into his life again. He couldn't shake the sense that allowing John into his home could be a decision he might come to regret. Chapter 10. Chloe fell into her new routine like clockwork. It wasn't something she had envisioned for herself while on the train over to the east, but it happened so naturally that she couldn't imagine it any other way. "I'm almost done with the potatoes," Chloe called to Henry as he came through the front door. "Whatever you're cooking, it smells great," he smiled. Chloe wasn't sure if her cooking really was that good, but either way, her future husband was always kind about it. "Ham stew, mashed potatoes, and green cabbage," she clarified for him. It was hard to believe she had already been in Rocky River for almost a month. During that time, her bond with Henry had grown much stronger than she could have hoped for, and she was already looking forward to Christmas together. Every morning, Henry would arrive and pick her up from Joyce's cabin, and they would talk about the day ahead during the short wagon ride. Chloe looked forward to spending the days cleaning the log cabin and cooking hearty meals as well as working on the ranch. There were animals that needed feeding and boundaries to check, and every day taught her something new. "Are you sure you have time to help me put up this new corral?" Henry asked. "I want to have it done ready for when the new calves are born in the spring." Chloe took her apron off and pulled the food to the side of the stove so it wouldn't spoil. "I'm looking forward to it." She quickly donned her winter coat and pulled her boots on, glad to be out in the crisp winter air as they walked across the yard together. "You know, I don't think I told you this," Henry began as they started work, "but I really do admire the bravery that you have. You traveled across the country on your own to a place that you'd never been to before. This isn't a life that you're used to, and yet you came here willingly, ready to embrace it. Thank you. Chloe's cheeks turned pink at the unexpected compliment. It's kind of you to say that, but it's what anyone would have done. I'm lucky you're so patient with me while I'm learning. I mean it, Henry continued. I'm sorry if I've been inattentive. I know that I should show my appreciation more. John's arrival caught me completely off guard, and it brought back a lot of memories I would rather have forgotten about. That's understandable, Chloe said. She handed him a new piece of wood, holding her end in place for him to hammer in the nails. You're so kind-hearted, Henry said. He paused and put his hammer down. It's one of the things I love about you, Chloe. Some women would have complained about the way John just turned up out of the blue, but not you. He's part of your family. If having him here makes you happy, then I want to support your decision. Henry gave her a long look. I know I asked you to marry me in the letter, but I want to do it properly. Will you become my wife, Chloe? Can we fix a date for our wedding? I'd like that very much. What I'm trying to say is I want to make us my priority now, not John. Chloe felt her heart soar with happiness. She had been secretly hoping the wedding would be soon, but pride prevented her from hinting about it. She wanted to make sure that Henry really wanted her as his wife, but now she knew. I'd love for us to have our wedding, she said. Henry wrapped his arms around her and pulled her closer, looking deep into her eyes. I promise next time I'm in town, I'll be sure to ask the pastor for a wedding date. I hope he can do it before Christmas. That would make me very happy, Chloe murmured. She could feel his heart beating under her hands and gasped as he lowered his head to brush a kiss on her lips. In spite of the cold, she felt a tingling warmth coursing through her veins. Our first Christmas together as man and wife. It will be perfect. Henry whistled happily as he continued his chores, and Chloe bustled away to finish getting lunch ready. Nothing more had come of the meeting with Sheriff Jackson, and she had all but put it out of her mind. Henry continued to reassure her that it must have been some sort of mistake that he was even questioned, and the more time that passed, the more inclined she was to believe it. There was only one cloud on the horizon of her new life with Henry, his brother John. Chloe sighed as she thought about John, who had been more than happy to take up residence on the ranch. He had been polite for the first few days, but lately she noticed that he was starting to treat the place as if it was his own, leaving dirty boots in the middle of the floor after she'd just cleaned and taking the largest helping of food without so much as a please or thank you. She'd had to bite her tongue on more than one occasion, reminding herself that it was Henry's dearest wish to be reconciled with his only relative. Later that evening, as she sat by the fire back at Joyce's ranch, the old woman gave her a shrewd look with her button-black eyes. Is something bothering you? She asked. I notice you're always quiet on the days that John's around. Chloe pulled another one of Henry's shirts onto her lap to mend the collar. She needed to choose her words carefully, what with Joyce being one of Henry's closest friends. I'm not sure that John is as brotherly as Henry was expecting, she said slowly. In what way? Joyce nodded to encourage her. Chloe thought about the look she had seen on John's face a few times lately when he thought he was alone. At first, she struggled to put her finger on what it was, but then she realized with a shock that it reminded her of how Emily used to look at her. There was jealousy in John's eyes upon seeing what his younger brother had achieved. It feels like there's a bit of brotherly jealousy going on from John, she explained. When he's looking round the ranch, I can see it in his eyes as though he resents Henry's success. She sighed again. He thinks it's come easily. What he doesn't notice is how hard Henry works while he's sleeping in for half the morning. I wondered whether he came to find Henry with good intentions, Joyce mused. She didn't seem surprised by Chloe's comments. Have you told Henry? Chloe shook her head quickly. I don't think it's my place to say anything. Henry likes to see the good in people, which I admire about him. It's probably for the best, Joyce said before pursing her lips. You can't get between the two brothers. It will only make things worse. I figure they'll sort it out between themselves. Henry might be kind, but he's not foolish. He'll see what John is really like soon enough. Chloe nodded. She wanted to follow Joyce's advice and focus instead on their blossoming relationship. But it was proving hard to do with John's brooding presence on the ranch, and her sense that he wasn't as friendly as he liked people to believe. "I won't be gone for long." Henry smiled down at Chloe from the wagon the following morning as she waved him off. True to his word, he was heading into town to get supplies, but also to talk to the pastor about their wedding. It filled her heart with joy to think that she was finally going to be married. "Don't worry about me. I reckon it's about time I tackled a few of the yard chores by myself, and Joyce isn't far away." Chloe didn't mention John. She hadn't even seen him that morning. As she watched the horse trotting away with Henry in the wagon, she smiled to herself. Joyce's wise words had put her mind at rest, and she started to imagine the future she and Henry were going to share together as man and wife. Although the land was still cloaked in snow, she could picture warm summer evenings sitting out on the veranda, perhaps with 2 children playing in the garden and horses grazing contentedly in the paddock nearby. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered in a prayer of gratitude. "You have already brought so many blessings to us, and having children of our own would be the final piece of a perfect life with Henry." She smiled again, knowing she was getting ahead of herself, especially since Henry had left her a list of chores to get on with in his absence. Chloe stole one last glance at Henry's wagon in the distance before making her way around the side of the log cabin toward the barn to make a start on her jobs for the day. There were horses that needed fresh hay and oats, as well as the new addition of a house cow that Chloe knew wasn't going to milk itself. It still made her chuckle as she thought about how much her life had changed since leaving the emporium. The stable was dark when she entered, and after the brightness of the snow outside, it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. She fumbled as she picked the bucket of oats up. "Fancy seeing you here." John suddenly loomed out of the shadows, almost making her drop the bucket. "John, I didn't see you there," Chloe stammered. "What are you doing in here?" Her nose wrinkled involuntarily as the strong whiff of alcohol reached her, and she noticed the slight sway in his movements as he drew even closer to her. "You're drunk." Her words weren't a question, more of a statement of shock. Chloe remembered the vow that he'd told his brother about how he had changed his ways. Clearly, he had been lying. "Of course, Henry finds himself a pretty wife, huh?" John slurred. His voice was harsher than usual. "Our parents always favored Henry when we were growing up," he continued, sounding resentful. "He was showered with affection and praise. The youngest child always is, I guess. He's always had it easier than me, whereas I was branded the troublemaker. He knows it too, and he's always used it to put me down." Chloe took a careful step backward as she listened to John's poisonous words about the man she loved. "I can't say I know much about your childhood," she said slowly, "but Henry has shown you nothing but kindness and hospitality after all these years, don't you think? He's not the sort of person who would put folks down, least of all his own brother." He made a groaning sound and bunched his fists before shaking his head. "You don't know what he's really like," he shouted. "You've only known him for a short amount of time. How could you possibly know as well as I do?" Chloe let her voice trail off as she realized that he wasn't even really listening to her responses anyway. John smiled lazily, and his eyes were glazed. "You reckon you have him figured out, but he isn't the man you think. Chloe." The stench of alcohol was rancid on his breath as he suddenly lunged at her. "Get away," she shrieked, pushing him backward. "Come on now." John gave a guttural laugh. "You should marry a real man like me, not Henry." "Get away from me," she cried again. She grabbed the pitchfork and held it in front of her. It was pointless screaming because nobody would hear them. Joyce was still in her cabin, and Henry was long gone on his way to town. "Don't be a fool," John said, sniggering at her. "I've been watching you. I reckon you like me more than Henry anyway. That's not true." She swiped the pitchfork toward him, and John staggered backwards to avoid the prongs touching him, tripping over the bucket and sprawling over onto the dirt floor. "I won't listen to your drunken lies. I love Henry, and I will be married to him soon." "You're making a mistake," John scoffed, scrambling to his feet again. "He's not the man he appears to be. Don't blame me when it all goes wrong." "What do you mean?" Chloe demanded. "You'll find out," John said. His words were still slurred, and he gave her a malevolent look before skulking away to go back to the cabin. Chloe's legs were trembling so badly that she had to sit down for a moment. She didn't know what to make of his wild accusations, but it was enough to sow a seed of doubt into her mind. Now that it was there, she couldn't help but question whether everything Henry had told her so far was a lie. And worse still, she knew now beyond doubt that John was determined to ruin everything. It was as if he wanted to take over Henry's life, and she didn't know what to trust or who to turn to. Chapter 11. Henry couldn't help but rush the journey back from the town despite the slippery track. He would normally be much more cautious about looking after his wagon, but he was far too eager to tell Chloe the good news. It didn't take long before the familiar sign of Green Oak Ranch came into view, and he was hurrying toward the cabin to speak with her. At times like that, he forgot that John was staying with them. It was still something that he found strange, but he wanted to believe that his brother was back in his life for a good reason. "I spoke with the pastor," Henry said as he burst through the door. He couldn't stop himself from revealing the news, not even to ask how her day had been, and he grinned. "I asked him for the earliest date that he could manage, so we've arranged it for Christmas Eve." "That sounds wonderful," Chloe said quietly. She smiled up at him, but her eyes didn't sparkle the way they usually did. Chloe's muted reaction sent a shiver of worry down Henry's back. He had imagined her falling into his arms, ready to celebrate the good news about their wedding date. "Are you all right?" Henry asked carefully. He was suddenly terrified that Chloe had changed her mind. Yes, of course, that's great news. I'm just speechless that we're actually going to get married," she admitted. Henry felt as though she was holding something back from him, but he didn't want to press her on the matter. Chloe was agreeing to marry him, and that was enough to make him the happiest man alive. "We'll be able to have our first Christmas together at the ranch," Henry said. "It will be magical, don't you think? It's everything I used to dream of when I was living alone in the shack looking for gold. It would be so lovely to work on the ranch, just the two of us," Chloe said, taking his big hands into hers. "I have grown to love the place, just as you said I would, and even better, the thought of our first Christmas as a couple living together with just us and Joyce next door. And John, of course," Henry added. "It wasn't exactly ideal, but he was his brother after all." "Do you think John might have a job somewhere in Rocky River by then?" Chloe asked lightly. "We could visit him. He would still be nearby." Henry frowned as he tried to imagine how his older brother would react to such a request. "Ask him to leave Green Oak Ranch, you mean? I don't think he would like it much, but I agree. He hasn't been pulling his weight around here." His previous good mood evaporated as he realized that Chloe was hinting at what had been staring him in the face. "He always was idle, and I know he's been taking my hospitality for granted," he admitted, looking sad. "That's nothing new, though. When we were younger, he often used to wriggle out of all the hard work, or he would wait until I'd done it, then claim it was him who'd gotten the job done." Chloe tried to hide her shock. Henry was saying the complete opposite of what John had said earlier. She wanted to believe her future husband, but something had to change. Perhaps his skills would be better suited to a job in town, Chloe suggested. "I don't think." Before he had a chance to finish his reply, there was a sharp knock at the door. "Sheriff Jackson, come in." Chloe hoped the lawman couldn't see her surprise and fear written all over her face as she opened the door. "Good afternoon, Miss Fuller. I need to see your fiancé immediately. I have new information about the theft of Blake Taylor's gold and the terrible assault on him." Chloe blinked a few times as she tried to take in what he had just said. "Theft? Assault?" she said faintly. It was the first time she had heard anything about it. "He's in here." "Please, come in," she said. She didn't want to let the sheriff in, but she knew that she didn't have a choice judging by his stern voice. As he stepped into the cabin, Chloe noticed for the first time that he was holding a piece of paper. "Sheriff Jackson," Henry said as he stood up from the table to his full height. "How can I help?" "I've gotten here an artist's impression based on the descriptions made by a witness of the robbery and attack on Blake Taylor," the sheriff said curtly. It was delivered anonymously to my office. Chloe's eyes widened as he held up the piece of paper, revealing the sketch of a man who looked remarkably similar to Henry. I'm sorry, Henry, but I need to take you away while we investigate. You're now the main suspect, so I'll have to report this to the sheriff at Drover's Creek. I'll be honest with you, it's not looking good. Chloe stared from the sheriff to her fiancé in disbelief. Tears started to pool in her eyes as she felt as though her entire world was crumbling away to nothing. Henry nodded stiffly with a heavy sigh. Before I go, can I have a minute or two alone with my fiancé? He asked the sheriff. Of course, I'll be waiting outside. Just don't do anything stupid, like trying to get away. Chloe waited until the door shut before rushing over to him. Henry, please don't go. It can't be true. It must be a mistake. I have to cooperate with him, Henry said softly. His expression was serious and full of regret. I beg of you to believe me when I tell you I'm innocent of this crime. I would swear to you on everything I hold dear that I'm innocent. I just have to find a way to prove it. I'm not sure who would hate me this much, but it feels like I've been set up. Someone is trying to get me in trouble. I just know it. Chloe remembered feeling a similar way when she had taken the blame for Emily's theft of the money at the emporium. She knew there was nothing worse than nobody believing the truth, and those thoughts propelled her to stand on her tiptoes and press a kiss onto his warm lips. I believe you, Henry, she said with a sudden confidence in her voice. I'll do what I can to help you. Together we can clear your name, I'm sure of it. Thank you, Henry said, breathing out heavily in relief. I'll see you soon. I really hope we can find a way out of this mess. I love you, Chloe. Remember that, please. Chloe followed him out the door, still finding it impossible to believe the scene in front of her. The sheriff led Henry down the path and slipped a rope around his wrists before helping him up onto his wagon. Please come back safely to me. She gasped under her breath. She hugged her arms around herself in a pale imitation of the safety of Henry's strong arms, which had encircled her not long before. Terror rose in her throat at the thought that her fiancé was going to be prosecuted for something he swore he was innocent of. What Chloe didn't see was another set of eyes watching Henry as he was led away. John lingered in the shadow of the barn door, his gaze set hard on his younger brother. As the sheriff's wagon pulled away, his lips curled up into a satisfied smile. Chapter 12. Over a week had passed by the time that Chloe was able to go into the town to see John. Her plans to support him were thwarted by heavy snowfall, which had made it impossible for her to travel from Joyce's in the wagon. All she could be thankful for was the support of her new friend. Joyce was a woman who prided herself on her good judgment of character, and she was steadfast in her belief that Henry was a good man. Don't worry, Joyce said cheerfully as she guided the sturdy horse along the main street of Rocky River. If the snow has stopped us getting into town, it will have stopped anything further happening with Henry as well. The traveling judge has probably been stuck in Hudsonville this whole time. Chloe was thankful for the older woman's generosity of spirit and how she always helped her see the positive side of a situation. She wasn't sure she could have coped without Joyce's kindness and understanding of the strange situation. At the sight of all the festive decorations in the store windows and the large Christmas tree twinkling with candles in the town center, Chloe felt a pang of sadness. I hope they've been taking good care of him, she muttered. She imagined him locked up with hardened criminals and shuddered. They were supposed to be enjoying planning their upcoming marriage, and she couldn't imagine her courtship with Henry coming to nothing after they had declared their love for one another. Hold on to that feeling, Joyce said, patting her with a mittened hand. Chloe lifted her chin. Joyce was right. There was no point wishing it hadn't happened. She felt a renewed sense of determination to clear Henry's name. They arrived at the sheriff's office, and Chloe wasted no time, rushing inside. Sheriff Jackson, is there any news on Henry? She said breathlessly. She tried to smile lightly at him in a last-minute attempt to appear nonchalant. Well, these things take time, and the snow has made things difficult. She knew that he was being evasive on purpose, but she didn't let it get to her. Chloe showed him the basket she was holding, hoping that he would grant her just one thing. "I wish to take this to Henry. It's some food that he likes, and it would only take a few moments. I figured what with the snow, you might have struggled to keep him fed." The sheriff rifled through the items to check what was in there and gave her a smile. "All right, but be quick. I wish more folks were as thoughtful as you about their loved ones." Chloe hastened through the office to where the cells were located before he changed his mind. There were only 3 cells, and 2 of them contained drunken men who seemed to be sleeping off the effects of too much whiskey. "Henry?" she cried. It stirred something within her to see him behind bars, languishing there for a crime he didn't commit. She bit her lip, determined not to show her shock, or worse, to cry. "I brought you some food," she said as he walked to the front of his cell and gripped the bars. She could see the dark rings under his eyes, but other than that, it was still the Henry that she remembered, and her heart squeezed with love as he smiled wearily at her. "Thank you for coming," he said in a hoarse voice. "You don't know what a welcome sight you are. I've had to put up with these 2 drunks for the last few nights. I swear they only start fighting so Sheriff Jackson will offer them a bed for the night." He chuckled, trying to make light of the situation. "Here," she said while passing some of the food through the bars. "It's baked ham in fresh rolls, and I have fruit cake too." "Boy, this smells good." He chewed the food hungrily. "How's the ranch?" he asked after a moment. "It's all fine, for now, I think," Chloe said. She felt a twinge of guilt. "I haven't even been able to get there through the snow. It's John who's been looking after the animals." Henry nodded with a worried frown. "Let's hope he's been getting up before lunchtime then. He never really liked working with animals." "There's something else that I wanted to mention about John." Chloe took a deep breath before continuing. "The day you came into town to see the pastor, John tried to corner me in the barn." She let her words hang between them as pain filled Henry's face. "I'm sorry, Henry. I know I should have told you as soon as you arrived home, but I didn't want to spoil how you see your brother. He'd been drinking. Perhaps it was just a drunken mistake." "I can't believe it," he growled from the other side of the bars. "I can't believe he would do such a thing to my fiancé. If I could get my hands on him." His anger caused her to flinch slightly, and Henry hastily put the food to one side and took hold of her hands through the bars. "I'm sorry, Chloe. I should have been there to protect you. I should have realized he hadn't changed one bit. He's still the same man he always was, a drunk and a liar." He bit back his anger again in the frustration of not being able to do anything about it while he was stuck in his cell. "I'm so sorry for leaving you with him. I was a fool to have believed that he could have changed so easily," Henry continued, shaking his head. "I should have known better than to be so naive." "It's okay. You weren't to know," Chloe said. She gave his hands a reassuring squeeze and smiled. "I admire you for thinking the best of him, Henry. If anyone's to blame, it's him. He said some pretty unsavory things about you as well, but I don't believe a word of it." "Promise me that you'll stay with Joyce," Henry said in a serious tone. "If he's already tried to make advances on you, who knows what else he's capable of? Don't go over to the ranch on your own." "I'll stay with Joyce." "Don't worry," Chloe said, wanting to reassure him as much as possible. She was all too aware that Henry would be left to his own thoughts once she had to leave and would torture himself with what could have happened. "Time for you to go now, Miss Fuller," the sheriff's voice called from his office. Chloe's heart sank. It felt as though she had only just arrived, but she was grateful for the few minutes he had allowed them to have together. "I'll be back soon," she whispered to Henry. He pressed a kiss to her lips through the bars, just as one of the drunks started groaning and waking up. "I love you." Chloe wished there was something she could do to help him, but everything felt hopeless. "Is there any word from the sheriff of Drovers Creek?" Chloe asked as she walked back through Sheriff Jackson's office. He shook his head firmly. "Everything's held up because of the snow." He gave her a level look. "Perhaps that's in your favor if you think he's innocent." Walking away from the sheriff's office with so little progress or new information left, Chloe feeling deflated. She cast her eye up and down the street to see if Joyce had finished running her errands. But there was no sign of her, as the horse waited patiently where they had left their wagon hitched. She decided she had to do something as a show of faith that Henry would soon be free to come home again, and racked her brain as to what it could be. "Come along, children," a woman said, bustling past her with a boy and girl scurrying behind her. Chloe couldn't help but smile at the sight. She hoped that would be her one day. The little boy stopped to adjust his scarf, which gave her an idea. She would buy some new wool from the mercantile and knit Henry a scarf, ready to give him on Christmas Day. There was a renewed spring in her step as she walked along the main street, but she faltered as she suddenly glimpsed a familiar figure ahead, Henry's brother. John Stewart walked with his head down and his hands in the pockets of his trousers as he hurried toward the saloon bar, glancing furtively over his shoulder before he entered. He looked disheveled, with an air of desperation, as though he couldn't wait to be gulping down his next drink. Chloe felt a wave of fear wash over her and shrank back into a doorway so that he wouldn't see her. "So much for telling Henry he no longer touched liquor or beer," she muttered crossly. After his leering, drunken advances in the barn, she realized there must only be one reason he was in the saloon. He had fallen back into his old ways. But what puzzled her was how he had time to waste drinking when he should be busy looking after the animals at the ranch in Henry's absence. There was something suspicious about his behavior, and she needed to find out more. A moment later, a woman emerged from the same door wearing an apron and holding onto a rug. She hung it over the rail out the front and proceeded to start beating the rug, sending up a cloud of dust. Chloe realized she must be one of the saloon's maids and quickly approached her, taking care to keep herself out of sight if John decided to look out of the window. "Excuse me," Chloe said quietly. "That man who just went into your saloon, do you recognize him?" "The one with the dark blonde hair?" the woman asked, nodding slowly. "Exactly. Has he been in before?" "Uh-huh. He's become something of a regular, even though I think he only moved here a few weeks ago." The woman put her hands on her hips and gave Chloe a quizzical look. "Is he giving you the runaround?" she asked. She had seen it all before. Chloe couldn't hide the surprise on her face as she realized that John had never even tried to change for his brother. His promise of being a changed man was all a lie. "In a fashion. Does he get into fights? Keep bad company?" "No, he's usually quite cheerful, although I wouldn't like to get on the wrong side of him when he's full of whiskey." The woman leaned closer. Chloe could tell she enjoyed gossiping. "He talks about the same thing over and over," she added, rolling her eyes. "Telling anyone who will listen about owning his own ranch soon. The others think he's crazy. He barely seems to have enough money to pay for his drinks, but he insists he'll have his own place very soon." "That's strange. Do you know what he means?" Chloe asked. The woman merely shrugged. "I'm sorry, that's all I know. He comes in a lot, though, and likes to brag about this new start that he's going to have soon." "Thank you," Chloe said. She sighed. None of it made any sense, and her mind whirled with thoughts of what it meant. She wondered if he had money which he hadn't told Henry about. "Actually, yes?" Chloe stopped as the barmaid called out to her. "There was something else," the woman continued. "What is it?" Chloe asked, hopeful that it could be something helpful. "He drank more than usual a couple of nights ago, and it made him even more talkative. I figured most of it was just drunken ramblings, but it might be of use to you. He said that the best thing about all of this is that his brother has done all of the hard work for him. He was laughing, saying that all he had to do was bide his time, and soon the ranch and a pretty young woman would all be his." Chloe felt the ground tilt beneath her and put her hand against the clapboard wall to steady herself as a shocking realization formed in her mind. "It's all down to John," she whispered to herself. "Does that help you in any way?" The barmaid narrowed her eyes as she asked the question. "Thank you. Yes, more than you could know." Chloe stood up taller and, for the first time in days, felt as though she had something that might just help clear Henry's name. If the woman at the saloon was correct, perhaps it was John who had informed the sheriff that Henry had committed the crimes against Blake Taylor. He'd lied about his own brother just so that he could get Green Oak Ranch, and it sounded like he wanted to marry her as well. She shuddered at the thought and felt sickened at the idea that John had been scheming against his own brother all this time. Chloe spotted Joyce up ahead as she hurried back to the wagon. "I need to go back to the sheriff's office," Chloe said. "Henry's innocent, and I think I know who's behind all of this." Joyce smiled with a look of relief. "Get along there before Sheriff Jackson goes out. I'm right behind you. I always knew Henry was a good man." Chapter 13. "I have proof," Chloe shouted as she entered the sheriff's office. "I have proof, Sheriff Jackson. You must listen to me." She stopped as she realized she was interrupting a conversation between the sheriff and another man. "Miss Fuller, would you just wait one moment?" the sheriff asked in an irritated tone. "I'm sorry, but this really can't wait. I have something that will help clear Henry's name. In fact, will you fetch him from his cell? I'd like him to hear the evidence that I've found. I think it's only fair." The two gentlemen exchanged a look before. Much to Chloe's surprise, Sheriff Jackson nodded. "I guess it can't harm. I don't think he'll cause any trouble, but this had better be good, Miss Fuller. I don't want you wasting our time." Joyce gave the sheriff a sharp look. "As if we would, Grant. Hear the girl out, will you?" Chloe wasn't sure where her newfound confidence had come from, but she was willing to do whatever it took to get the sheriff to realize that Henry wasn't the guilty party in all of this. "It's not a waste of time," she called after Sheriff Jackson. "I promise." Henry's face lit up with a smile when he saw Chloe and Joyce in the office as the sheriff escorted him through. Chloe was relieved to see that he wasn't handcuffed, and although he looked exhausted, he seemed in good spirits otherwise. "Thank you, Sheriff," Chloe said, smiling to show her appreciation. "I guess I should introduce you to my colleague," Jackson replied, gesturing to the other man. "This is Sheriff Jones from Drover's Creek. We're working together to solve this crime." Chloe could see the panic register on Henry's face, so she went to his side and reached out to squeeze his hand reassuringly. "Joyce," Henry spoke up, "whatever happens to me, I want you to promise that you'll look after Chloe, okay? Whether that's helping her settle here in Rocky River or to move back to Boston, will you look after her in my absence?" "Of course, Henry. You don't even need to ask." Joyce smiled encouragingly. Henry turned back to Chloe. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to her. "I'm innocent, and I will swear by that until my last breath. I'm just sorry for letting you down and getting you involved with all this before we're even married." "You don't have to apologize for anything," Chloe said firmly. She couldn't stop a smile from spreading across her face. "I've just come from the saloon down the road where I spoke with one of the barmaids. She told me something very enlightening. In fact, I'm convinced it explains exactly why you're here, even though you're innocent." "What?" Henry's expression alternated between worried and hopeful. "How would a barmaid know anything? I never even go to the saloon." Chloe glanced toward the two sheriffs, and they both nodded for her to continue. "It's not the sort of news I'm happy to bring you, Henry. I believe it's your brother, John, who is behind all this." Her heart squeezed with sympathy for him as his eyes clouded with disappointment. While it was good news for Henry's innocence, she knew it would hit him hard that the betrayal came from his own brother. "John's up to his old ways, getting drunk regularly in the saloon. The barmaid told me he's forever saying that he's going to take over Green Oak Ranch soon, and even that he's going to try and steal me from you. He's bragging that you've done all the hard work for him already, and he's just going to take it all from you." She watched the shock register on Henry's face. He closed his eyes for a moment and shook his head, and she wished she could restore his faith in his brother, but it was too late for that. "I should have known it was too good to be true," Henry said heavily. "John was never going to change his ways, but I didn't for one moment think he would try and ruin my life in such a terrible way." Henry turned to the sheriffs with a pleading look in his eyes. "Sheriff Jackson, I know that you haven't known either of us for very long, and we're new in Rocky River, but I promise this woman is good and honest. You should take what she says as the truth. I can vouch for her." "And I can too," Joyce chimed in. "You've known me for years, Grant, and I'm telling you, Henry is innocent, and Chloe is as honest as they come. You have to believe them. Otherwise, there will be a miscarriage of justice, and I know you're not the sort of man who would want that on your conscience." Chloe held her breath as both of the sheriffs stepped forward. Their expressions were unreadable as they stared at Henry. Suddenly, Sheriff Jones reached out and shook hands with Henry, breaking into a broad smile as he did so. "I was held up by the snowstorm, and I'm sorry for that. Otherwise, we would have been able to deliver the news to you much sooner." "What news?" Henry asked nervously. He still wasn't sure if they believed Chloe's story. Sheriff Jones pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. It was a sketch of a man, and for one terrible moment, Chloe thought it might be Henry again. "Is this your brother, John?" the sheriff asked. Henry, Chloe, and Joyce all nodded in unison. "That's him," Chloe said firmly, so there could be no doubt. "The person in this picture, your brother John, was seen by several witnesses to have beaten up Blake Taylor and stolen his gold," Sheriff Jones said. "Because you both look similar, that's where the confusion arose. However, we made further inquiries and managed to trace the fate of the gold once it had left Blake Taylor's possession." "Where is it? John barely has any money," Henry said. "That's why I let him live at my ranch until he could get back on his feet again." "I'm afraid your brother isn't the sort of man to slip away with what he stole. It turns out he lost it all within one night of gambling." Henry stared at the sheriff in shock. "So he stole it and then gambled it all away?" Chloe couldn't help the smile working its way onto her face. It was further evidence of Henry's innocence. "Uh-huh. John could have probably gotten away with it and been a wealthy man. He could have purchased a ranch, found a wife, but instead, his weak character led him straight to the gambling tables." "He always was tempted to take the easy route," Henry said sadly. "I expect the liquor led him astray as well." "John tried to get you arrested for a crime that he committed," Chloe said. "He was trying to take advantage of your good luck, not to mention all your hard work, and take it for himself, just like he did to poor Blake Taylor." "Well, I'm glad we got that straight." Sheriff Jackson picked up his hat and put it on. "Sheriff Jones and I need to go and arrest the real culprit of this crime." He shot Henry and Chloe a smile. "You're to stay here, especially you, Miss Fuller. You've been a great help, but I don't want you getting into any danger." "He's in the Black Crow Saloon right now," Chloe said urgently. "I saw him go in there with my own eyes." The two sheriffs wasted no time in striding out of the office. Henry was free to go, and she turned to smile at him, but his expression was one of pained confusion. "I have to talk to John before he's arrested," he explained as he too headed for the door. "He'll pay for his crimes, but I can't rest until I know why he deceived me." The cold air greeted Henry like an old friend as he followed the two sheriffs. His mind felt as though it was still racing to catch up with everything that had happened, but at least he no longer had to plead his innocence. He was still filled with hurt as he thought about what this would mean for John's fate, but he was only going to face the consequences of his own actions. "Henry, wait for me," Chloe hurried after him. "I can't leave you to go through this alone. I want to be by your side and support you." He nodded, full of gratitude for her courage and kind heart. "Promise you'll stay back a little?" John can be pretty nasty when he's been drinking. By the time they arrived at the saloon, Sheriff Jackson had already dragged John out into the snowy street, and Sheriff Jones had just finished telling him why he was being arrested. Henry locked eyes with his brother as the two sheriffs hauled him to his feet. "Why did you do it, John?" he growled. John merely shrugged in response, as though what he'd done wasn't that serious. "Answer me," Henry demanded. "I probably won't see you again, and I have to know if I'm to have any peace of mind. You owe me that at least, if not for my sake, for our parents." John shrugged again, but this time he looked slightly remorseful. "I was in Drover's Creek, and a man told me that someone who looked similar to me was out there panning for gold," John began. "I immediately knew that it had to be you. At first, I was just going to find you and ask for a little money. You see, I was in Drover's Creek looking for work, but I was beginning to get desperate. It seemed easier just to ask for your help. But then you found out about Blake Taylor's success, huh?" Sheriff Jones cut in, taking over the story. "Our informant told us that you used to drink together. Blake was boasting about striking gold, and you were jealous, John. You spotted an opportunity and asked him to give you some of his gold. But when he said no, you turned violent, isn't that right? I didn't mean for it to get out of hand, John whined. It was dark, and he fought back, the fool. It's his fault. His voice was desperate, and Henry remembered when he would use a similar tone as boys to get out of trouble with their parents. You beat that man and left him for dead, Sheriff Jackson said, unable to keep quiet any longer. He shook his head and gave John a contemptuous look. If a passing stranger hadn't shown him kindness, Blake Taylor probably would have died. You could have gotten help for him, but your sort never does. You took advantage of Mr. Taylor and your own brother. You must pay for your actions, John, and perhaps use your time in jail to pray. The Lord will show you how to be a better man. But none of this was my fault. John let out a whimper as though it would garner him some sympathy, but Henry was stony-faced. Okay, we've heard enough, Sheriff Jackson grunted. You're under arrest for the robbery of Blake Taylor's gold and the assault on him that nearly killed him. Come on, Sheriff Jones. Let's take him to the jailhouse and keep him there until the judge can deal with him. Henry was stunned as he watched his brother being dragged from the bar, slurring his words as he had done years ago. It was the reason why he hadn't spoken to him for years, and he vowed that he would never be so trusting again if his brother were to return. I have you to thank for all of this, Henry said, looking at Chloe. His heart was practically bursting with gratitude. I would still be in that cell without your persistence. They might have still believed it was me if you hadn't pleaded my case so well. I only did what anyone would do, Chloe said, flushing from the compliment. Nonsense. You never gave up on me, and you believed me when I told you I was innocent. Come on, let's head home, Henry said, as he wrapped an arm around her and led Chloe back through the snow-covered town. We have a wedding to look forward to, if I'm not mistaken. Epilogue. The church bells pealed in the crisp winter air as Henry escorted Chloe back outside after their brief wedding ceremony. He thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his whole life than his new wife. Her dress was modest, but flattered her womanly figure, and the velvet cloak, a present from Joyce, showed off her glossy curls. I can't believe we're finally married. This is the best gift I could have wished for this Christmas, he said. His heart swelled with love and pride as he gazed down at her. It's certainly been a whirlwind few weeks, Chloe replied, with a hint of amusement in her eyes. I thought life would be quiet in Rocky River, but nothing could be further from the truth. You don't regret any of it, do you? Henry asked. Chloe shook her head quickly. I'll never regret anything with you by my side, Henry. Her face fell for a split second. The only thing I'm sad about is that your reconciliation with John didn't work out. I know how much you wanted to believe he had changed for the better. Henry tucked her hand in the crook of his elbow as they started walking. Joyce was still busy chatting with the pastor. All I can do is pray for him now. Perhaps one day he might see the error of his ways, who knows. Chloe turned her face upward just as the first snowflakes started to fall. The night was drawing in, and she could see the stars twinkling in the blue-black sky between the ragged clouds. She took a deep breath, wanting to remember the special moment for the rest of her life. We have such a wonderful future to look forward to, she said softly. I was terrified you might be disappointed when I first arrived, or that you might have wished for a wife who knew more about your way of life. Never, Henry exclaimed. I was too shy to show it, but my heart belonged to you the moment I caught sight of you standing in the snow, waiting for me as the stagecoach left. Chloe's eyes shone at his words. Oh, Henry, I dreamt of this moment, night after night, when I was in Boston. I kept your letters under my pillow, but I didn't dare hope that one day we really would be married. It was only thinking of you that gave me hope when I was in jail, Henry said. His voice was thick with emotion, and he pulled her into his arms. Chloe melted against Henry's broad chest, feeling their hearts beating in unison. As he pressed his first tender kiss against her warm lips as man and wife, they both felt the love tingle between them, making them dizzy with happiness. I'll remember this Christmas Eve for the rest of my life, Chloe whispered, gazing into the depths of Henry's kind brown eyes. The stars above us, the snow falling, the feeling of your arms holding me tight. She sighed happily and brushed another kiss on his lips. "You've made me the happiest man in Rocky River," Henry murmured. He brushed a stray lock of her hair aside and gave her a piercing look that set her pulse racing again. "And I thank the Lord that you insisted that Sheriff Jackson should listen to you," he chuckled. "I always knew you could never have done such a thing," Chloe replied. "You're too good a man, and you'll make a wonderful pa when we have a family together." Candles twinkled in every window, and the sound of carols being sung drifted toward them. "Shall we go and watch the Christmas Eve celebrations?" Henry asked. "Joyce tells me the whole town turns out for a candle-lit procession and everyone enjoys mugs of hot chocolate while carols are sung. It sounds like the perfect end to a perfect day. In that case, there's just one more thing for me to do." Henry swept Chloe into his arms again. "Thank you for believing in me, Chloe. I'll always love you," he murmured, as a shooting star blazed a silvery trail across the night sky above them. Chloe felt as though her heart would burst with happiness. "And thank the Lord for bringing us together and for our new home and good friends and neighbors." They strolled toward the Christmas tree in the center of town, which was ablaze with twinkling candles, as Joyce and the pastor followed behind. Several of the townsfolk waved to greet them, and Chloe knew that finally she and Henry had found their place in life to raise a family and grow old together. They were truly blessed indeed. The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler, with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.